Chapter 692. Most of the pressure from the 365 giant stars was transferred to the Yellow Springs network. Due to the existence of this power, the Yellow Springs network's ability to withstand the pressure from the 18 layers of hell below increased greatly. Text first. These two facts caused both the speed at which the heavenly cycle star formation pressed down and the speed at which the 18 layers of hell pressed down greatly. Normally, this kind of slowing down was nothing. It could even be said to be prolonging the process of torture. However, at this moment, it was completely different. Because of this slowing down, the Netherworld network had more time to repair the damage caused by the pressure. And because of this slowing down, the endless starry sky above and the passageway that connected the untainted world to the untainted world also had enough time to gather the scattered Dharma power and condense it into a mysterious mist around the stars in the sky. Hongjun stood under the heavenly cycle star formation. When this change appeared, he could not help but know that this mysterious change was caused by his almost omnipotent master. Understanding this, he could not help but have even more confidence in the matter of mending the heavens. Since his master was so powerful, if he said he could do it, then he could definitely do it. With this firm confidence, Hongjun's will, which had already been raised to the limit, once again increased by quite a bit. Although the change between the two poles had slowed down, it did not completely stop. The 365 giant stars continued to press down, and the 18 layers of hell continued to press up. As a result, as time passed, the 365 giant stars got closer and closer to the primordial world, and more of the 18 spaces below were squeezed into the Yellow Springs network. The pressure from the 365 giant stars naturally caused the huge tunnel to collapse. There was no need to say anything more. The upward compression of the 18 layers of hell's essence produced a rather shocking result. Space-time was an extremely mysterious existence. Moreover, the 18 layers of space were countless times more mysterious than ordinary space-time. The changes caused by the compression of the 18 layers of hell into the Yellow Springs network were naturally unimaginably mysterious. After the 18 layers of space gradually squeezed into the Yellow Springs network, the spring water in the Yellow Springs network began to undergo a mysterious and indescribable change. The spring water actually began to slowly transform from the most yin and turbid energy into the 18 levels of hell. During this process, it was as if the boundless Yellow Springs water had been assimilated by the 18 hells. Every bit of energy was affected by the 18 hells, or it could be said that it had fused with the 18 hells to create a brand new hells. This change was so mysterious that it was unimaginable. As a result, the Netherworld network, which had already sunk 12,960,000 kilometers into the ground, began to slowly expand while wrapped in countless cracks. It became fuller and fuller, and the gap between the two tributaries of the Netherworld also became smaller and smaller in the process. During this process, the Underworld network core in Luo Fan's hands was subjected to an indescribably huge pulling force and began to sink. This pulling force was unimaginably strong. It was as if there were thousands of beings at the peak of the Daoyuo loose Dao pulling this pearl with all their might. With such a powerful force, if Luo Fan didn't have the world of his sea of consciousness to share the pull, he feared that even his body would be pulled into the source of the pull without any resistance. This pulling force did not come from anywhere else, but from below, from the 18 spacetimes that were squeezing toward the primordial world. From the perspective of the primordial world, the void inside these 18 spacetimes was only the size of a thumb. However, from the perspective of spiritual sense, willpower, and soul, each of these spacetimes could accommodate billions of primordial worlds. This contradiction and difference caused these spacetimes to appear to be at least 10 times larger than the 365 giant stars above. This made it extremely difficult for these spacetimes to squeeze into the primordial world. Apart from causing terrifying damage to the primordial world, it could also produce an extremely powerful traction force that acted on all the things inside the primordial world that were connected to it. This process was just like how living beings had to take a deep breath when they used their strength. If Luo Fan could not hold the core of the Netherworld network under this powerful traction force and let the core be pulled into the 18 layers of hell, then the entire Netherworld network would be broken into countless parts in an instant, causing the 18 layers of hell that the Netherworld network originally endured to be concentrated in a few parts. As a result, the Netherworld network would collapse and disappear section by section. In the end, it would spread, and even the entire lower level of the primordial world would completely collapse. With such a serious consequence, how could Luo Fan dare to let the pearl sink? Although he had the sea of consciousness to help support it, the extremely powerful pressure still made Luo Fan feel extremely pressured. It was as if his entire body was about to tremble under this pressure. Fortunately, this was just a feeling. With the sea of consciousness of Luo Fan, it was not too difficult for him to bear the pulling force of thousands of beings at the peak of the Daoyuo Loose Dao. Time passed slowly. After an unknown period of time, the 365 stars above finally crushed the passage to a position close to the Golden Division Point, which was the position that Hong Jun had been waiting for a long time. When the 365 stars reached the position, Hong Jun's eyes lit up. He opened his mouth and let out a long roar that shook the primordial world. The void behind his head directly appeared, like a huge gray ball, and blasted toward the sky. At this moment, in the primordial world where Luo Fan was, more than half of the 18 spacetimes had been squeezed into the Netherworld network. Because of the entry of the 18 spacetimes, the Netherworld network had expanded and connected into one. All the tributaries of the Netherworld network in the Netherworld network no longer had any gaps. The distance between each other had completely disappeared. The entire Netherworld network looked like a yellow sea. This yellow sea was boundless, enveloping every inch of the void of the entire lower level of the primordial world. Only a certain position in the northwest of the Yellow Sea had a gap with a radius of tens of thousands of miles. This was where Luo Fan was, and also the location of the entire Yellow Sea. At this moment, Luo Fan held the core pearl of the Netherworld network in his hand. His expression was incomparably solemn. His body was as stable as before, but his eyes were filled with solemnity. Compared to when it first appeared, the incomparably huge pulling force had increased by God knows how many tens of thousands of times. At this moment, even with the help of the sea of consciousness, Luo Fan's body truly felt the huge pulling force. The Fa Li in his body had no choice but to circulate in his body, trying his best to stabilize his body. The pearl in his hand was still emitting countless threads of light, connecting to the Yellow Sea that was tens of thousands of miles away. Originally, this core was the origin of the entire Netherworld network. Countless Yellow Springs water should have flowed out of this core. However, at this moment, because most of the 18 layers of hell had merged with the boundless Yellow Sea, the situation had long been reversed. Instead, countless Yellow Springs water that had transformed into some kind of mysterious space-time flowed out of the Yellow Sea after going through changes, trying hard to pour into the core. This was also the most serious part of the pressure that Luo Fan felt. After all, if the core was completely filled with seawater from the Yellow Sea, its nature would naturally change greatly. At that time, the core's nature would be no different from the Yellow Sea, and it would naturally directly merge with the Yellow Sea. At that time, the endless Yellow Springs water contained in the core would instantly erupt, directly exploding the Yellow Sea and destroying the entire primordial world. Therefore, at this moment, Luo Fan was using all his strength to control the core, trying hard to urge the Yellow Springs water to continuously gush out of the core and merge with the surrounding Yellow Sea. In this way, he could prevent the Yellow Sea's seawater from flowing into the core, and he could also reduce the amount of Yellow Springs water contained in the core. However, no matter how he urged it, once the Yellow Springs water contained in the core erupted, it would still destroy the primordial world. However, as long as the timing was right, when the 18 layers of hell completely entered the primordial world and completely merged with the Yellow Sea, the Yellow Sea would naturally evolve into a true space-time. At that time, even if all the Yellow Springs water in the core merged with it, it would no longer cause any pressure to the primordial world. When the 365 giant stars above arrived at the golden section of the passageway, the process of the 18 space-time squeezing into the primordial world reached an extremely subtle moment. At this moment, the entire Yellow Sea suddenly trembled slightly. Above the Yellow Sea, the cracks caused by the countless tributaries of the Yellow Spring suddenly stagnated. Then, as if they had suddenly come to life, they swam wildly. In an instant, they completely connected into one, flashing with a mysterious and strange brilliance, as if they were about to explode. At that moment, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. In an instant, his will, which had merged with the entire Yellow Springs network, suddenly shook. In an instant, it began to circulate wildly in the countless cracks. In the blink of an eye, it swam through the entire Yellow Sea and directly merged with the cracks. As the will merged, the cracks shook again. The way it swam suddenly changed, and it began to continuously outline the huge Yellow Sea that covered the entire lower layer of the primordial world. In the blink of an eye, it formed an incomparably huge and strange array that completely enveloped the entire lower layer of the primordial world. This formation was so miraculous that it instantly drew all the power that could tear through the entire Yellow Sea into the formation, causing the entire formation to erupt with a mysterious brilliance that seemed unbreakable and incomparably heavy. It was as if even the hardest object in the world couldn't damage it in the slightest. The brilliance continued to strengthen and expand, and finally interweaved into one. Then, it suddenly sank and completely merged with the Yellow Sea. On the surface of the Yellow Sea, it formed a strange plane. This plane was extremely mysterious. It was as smooth as a boundless mirror, but it could not reflect anything on it. Instead, it was more like a huge door that led to a mysterious and unfathomable place. There was an infinitely vast void with infinite volume, which was dotted with clusters of galaxies and specks of stars. This was the virtual world that Luo Fan had created and attached to the Yellow Springs network. This virtual world was incomparably calm and harmonious, operating slowly according to the various rules that Luo Fan had set up. Occasionally, there would be beams of light streaking across the universe, gliding from one star to another. Occasionally, there would be shocking beasts soaring in the void, and occasionally, there would be tides of cosmic yuan qi as they breathed in and out. This virtual world was boundless. It was countless times wider than the entire untainted land. At this moment, although the surface of the Yellow Sea was so vast, only a small part of it appeared on this plane. Although this small part included the area where the core was, the core of the virtual world did not appear on this plane. This was because its core also overlapped with the core of the Yellow Springs network. The core of the Yellow Springs network still existed outside of the Yellow Sea. Naturally, what appeared in the virtual world was missing the small part where the core was located. When this plane appeared, the entire Yellow Sea suddenly seemed to calm down. Any tremors or changes were completely covered by this plane. The entire lower layer of the untainted land seemed to have completed its final transformation. Of course, this was just an illusion. In fact, under the cover of this plane, the Yellow Sea below was still undergoing earth-shaking changes. The 18 spacetimes were still constantly squeezing into the untainted land and into the Yellow Sea. They constantly assimilated the Yellow Sea, causing the seawater in the Yellow Sea to constantly change its nature and transform spacetime. This process also produced an extremely powerful impact, and it also constantly shook the Yellow Sea. However, this kind of impact and this kind of shaking seemed to have passed its peak. Instead, it began to slowly weaken, unable to break through the huge formation. In the end, all the changes were completely isolated below, making it difficult for all the changes within to truly affect the untainted land above. This was the opportunity that Luo Fan had been waiting for a long time. It was not difficult for Luo Fan to set up a mysterious formation to manifest the virtual world and transform the shaking impact of the Yellow Sea into the power of this formation. However, the difficult part was that once the formation was set up, it would naturally circulate. Even he could not interfere and change it. This would also cause the ability of the formation to withstand power to remain at the peak when it was first set up, unable to increase any further. In other words, after the formation was set up, if the impact from below increased again, the formation would directly explode because it could not withstand the power, thus losing its protective function. Therefore, Luo Fan had to wait for the impact to reach its peak before setting up the formation, instead of setting it up from the beginning to safely wait for the various changes below. When the formation was set up, Luo Fan only felt the pressure around his body loosen. The amount of seawater that surged towards the core of the Yellow Sea was greatly reduced, and the pressure on Luo Fan was naturally greatly reduced. In an instant, Luo Fan understood that the most important small step had been successfully taken. As long as this step was successful, although there would still be endless pressure acting on him, and he would still need to constantly control the various changes, the impact and pressure produced by all of this would not be more difficult than before. After all, the peak of the pressure had already passed in that instant. Even if there were more ups and downs in the future, it would definitely not exceed that instant. It could be said that the lower layer of the primordial wasteland was already worry-free. Understanding this, Luo Fan's expression instantly relaxed a lot, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Just as the lower layer of the primordial wasteland underwent such a huge change, Hong Jun's space that carried 296 billion Grotto Heaven World beads had already blasted towards the entrance of the passage on the ground. When this space was first created, there was naturally nothing special about it. It was just an ordinary storage space. However, after the 296 billion Grotto Heaven World pearls were placed in the void had undergone an earth-shattering change. It had become extremely special and mysterious. Not to mention anything else, just the stability of the space had already reached an indescribable level. It was not inferior to the primordial wasteland at all. At this moment, such a mysterious space was filled with countless mysterious power that emitted a gray brilliance. It seemed to have exceeded the limits of the space it could withstand. This space blasted upwards, and in the blink of an eye, it traversed tens of millions of kilometers and directly blasted into the entrance of the passage that Luo Fan had created. That passage was created by Luo Fan's boundless FALE. There was no need to mention how mysterious it was. If it was an external object, it would be able to pass through unless it was a powerful existence like the countless stars that had passed through before. Otherwise, once it entered, it would be completely isolated from the outside world. In other words, normally speaking, when Hong Jun sent this part of the void into the tunnel, his connection with it would be completely cut off due to the unbelievable power of the tunnel. As a result, this part of the void would be completely out of his control, and he could not even sense it anymore. However, it was clear that this was not an ordinary situation. When Luo Fan imparted the heaven-mending technique to Hong Jun, he had also given Hong Jun the authority to enter and exit the passage at will. As a result, even though he had sent this space into a passage that seemed to be another space, Hong Jun could still clearly sense the existence of that space. Even his will was still completely attached to that space, completely controlling every rule, law, and every bit of power in that space. Right at that moment, with a thought from Hong Jun, the will that completely controlled that area of space changed slightly. Then, the space suddenly broke open 296 billion holes. The positions of those holes were extremely mysterious. They corresponded to the 296 billion Grotto Heaven World beads. There was not the slightest bit of dislocation, nor was there the slightest bit of slanting. Hashtag Chapter 693. The moment the 296 billion holes appeared, all the Grotto Heaven's pearls in the void trembled and naturally came out of the holes. They appeared outside the void and appeared in the tunnel. First written text. Each of the Grotto Heaven's pearls was formed from the refinement of a Grotto Heaven's world. Although their shapes were different, each Grotto Heaven's world was, in fact, a Grotto Heaven's world. There was a boundless void within it, and there were countless profound and mysterious laws within it. It contained a vast amount of all kinds of vital energies and all kinds of powers. When the Grotto Heaven's world pearls left the void and arrived in the tunnel, Hong Jun moved his mind. The various techniques that Luo Fan had taught him about mending the heavens quickly flowed through his mind. As this technique flowed through his body, his thoughts and his magic power underwent some kind of mysterious change. When the change occurred, the 296 billion Grotto Heaven's world pearls suddenly exploded. They instantly returned to their original state and turned back into 296 billion square meters of Grotto Heaven's world. Each of the Grotto Heaven's world was vast and boundless, and each of them contained an unimaginable power. Under such circumstances, no matter how long the tunnel was, no matter how much it could withstand, it would not be able to accommodate all 296 billion square meters of Grotto Heaven's world. As a result, a force that was more terrifying and powerful than the force produced by the 365 stars instantly erupted from the Grotto Heaven's world and charged towards the tunnel constructed by Luo Fan's Dharma power. Of course, such a terrifying force was not something that the tunnel could withstand. In the blink of an eye, the part of the tunnel that was close to the untainted world exploded and turned into boundless Dharma power that accumulated around the tunnel. The Grotto Heaven's world was a space-time. There was an infinite space within it. The tunnel constructed by Luo Fan's Dharma power was located at the gap between the untainted world and the endless starry sky. Strictly speaking, it was a place where there was no time or space. Under such circumstances, the 296 billion square meters of Grotto Heaven's world lost the external pressure. They overlapped with each other and gradually fused together. The fusion of the two Grotto Heaven worlds was not as smooth as imagined, and it was not entirely beneficial to the two Grotto Heaven worlds. At the very least, for the living beings of this paradise world, the fusion of two paradise worlds was a complete disaster. The process of merging the Grotto Heaven worlds was the collision and confrontation of two completely different spacetimes. The result was that everything in the two Grotto Heaven worlds would be broken and reorganized. Whether it was time, space, matter, or energy, they were all the same. This transformation process covered everything in the Grotto Heaven world. If there were living beings inside, they would not be able to survive this transformation unless they could isolate themselves from the destruction of time and space. If there were a few more space-time blends, the changes would be even more intense, and the consequences would naturally be even more terrifying. If the number of worlds in the Grotto Heaven increased to the current number of 296 billion cubes, the change would definitely be intense to an unbelievable level. The degree of intensity was enough to turn the fusion process into a boundless, chaotic state. And this was the reality that was currently happening in the Shattered Passageway. The change was so intense that it had already reached an uncontrollable level. If Hong Jun only relied on his own will and power to control the change, the result would be that the process of the Grotto Heaven worlds intertwining would be like a landslide, causing an increasingly intense change. In the end, it would not be impossible for the entire primordial world to be engulfed. However, at this moment, that was not the case. At that moment, Hong Jun's will and Dharma power had undergone a subtle and mysterious change. His ability to control the change had already increased to an unbelievable level. As a result, even during the process of the change, Hong Jun's will was still attached to the 296 billion square meters of Grotto Heaven worlds. He was still carefully comprehending every single change. Although the comprehension was not detailed, and it was difficult for him to control the process of the Grotto Heaven worlds intertwining, it was still tens of thousands of times better than his original ability. Free ebook download. Hong Jun clearly did not intend to use his will to control the change. When he sensed the change in the process of the Grotto Heaven worlds intertwining, the space that originally contained the 296 billion Grotto Heaven world beads suddenly exploded. Within it, the boundless and bizarre grayish power, along with countless space-time fragments, turned into hundreds of millions of grayish dragons and directly charged towards the whole body formed by the fusion of 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens. In the blink of an eye, it had already charged into the grotto heaven world. These strange forces were originally born from the circulation process of the 296 billion square meters grotto heavens in a way similar to the structure of the supreme Great Tao. They had an extremely subtle connection with each of the 296 billion square meters grotto heavens and could produce a strange resonance with each grotto heavens. It was precisely because of this that when the power wrapped around countless space-time fragments and entered the whole formed by the grotto heaven worlds, it naturally caused the 296 billion square meters of grotto heaven worlds that were intertwining to produce all sorts of strange vibrations. The vibrations were mysterious and contained unbelievable mysteries of space-time. In the vibrations, the process of the 296 billion square meters of grotto heaven worlds fusing gave birth to extremely subtle changes. This change caused the 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens to no longer fuse chaotically according to the way they intersected. Instead, it started to move in a certain direction, a direction that was compatible with the method that Luo Fan had imparted to him. At that moment, Hong Jun felt his body suddenly being hit by a power that even made him feel as if his entire body would be instantly crushed into powder and turned into nothingness. This power was so powerful, and it came so suddenly. It made him feel as if his mind and soul were almost unable to move. Even his thoughts were slightly stagnant. Fortunately, the method that Luo Fan had passed down was extremely detailed. It clearly described all the possible changes that could be encountered and even explained countless ways to deal with it. Among them, what Hong Jun was currently experiencing was in those descriptions. The way to deal with it was also very simple, which was to ignore it. To ordinary people, this method was simply disregarding human life. After all, it was impossible for ordinary people to control their own feelings. It was not something that they could ignore even if they wanted to. However, to cultivators who had stepped onto the path of cultivation, especially to cultivators who had reached Hong Jun's current cultivation realm, this method was a real way to solve problems. After all, to a cultivator like Hong Jun, his control of his body and soul had already attained the acme of perfection and perfection. Controlling their own feelings and getting rid of certain feelings was a simple task for them. Hence, Hong Jun was not worried at all, nor did he hesitate at all. With a slight thought, the feeling of pressure on his body weakened bit by bit. In the end, it completely disappeared as if it did not exist at all. After getting rid of this feeling, he finally understood why he had such a feeling. It was clearly caused by his will being distorted during the process of the 296 billion square meters grotto heaven merging. It acted on his will and the power that was emitting gray light. It could be said that the one who was truly affected by the pressure and the impact was his mind, not his body. It was also because of this that he could use the method of ignoring it to get rid of the effect of the pressure. After getting rid of the pressure, Hong Jun's thoughts returned to their previous speed. In the blink of an eye, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. The guidance of the 296 billion square meters grotto heaven merging also returned to its previous smoothness. With his guidance, the 296 billion square meters of grotto heaven worlds fused together and produced a huge grotto heaven world, which directly blocked the entrance of the magical power channel that Luo Fan had constructed. Even the shadow of the channel completely disappeared. This caused the sky of the entire primordial world to seem to have completely returned to its original state. Of course, it only seemed to be like that. Compared to the original state, there was no sun, stars, moon, or even clouds in the entire untainted land. Only the light emitted by the boundless primordial chi below prevented the entire untainted land from falling into darkness. This change was not enough to cut off Hong Jun's will. nor was it enough to eliminate Hong Jun's perception. It also did not mean that the mending of the sky had been completed. After the change appeared, Hong Jun still used all his strength to control the merging process of the 296 billion square Grotto Heavens world, so that the 296 billion square Grotto Heavens world would no longer press down on the primordial world. Instead, it would turn upwards, or rather, it would head towards the source of the passage, towards the direction where the 365 giant stars were crushing down. In the blink of an eye, the Grotto Heaven had completed 1/10,000th of the merging process. This 1/10,000th seemed to be an extremely tiny amount of completion, yet it already created an unbelievable effect. It directly arrived at the golden section of the passageway, and it just happened to collide with the grand universe stellar formation that was formed from 365 stars. The heavenly cycle stars formation could even split the primordial world into pieces and directly collapse, let alone the 296 billion square meters Grotto Heaven that were intertwined with 1/10,000th of the merging process. It was still an extremely incomplete and evolving world. At the moment of contact, the world barrier was directly crushed, and the 365 giant stars directly rushed into the Grotto Heaven. The power of the 365 giant stars was earth-shattering. It was enough to crush the entire void and destroy the Grotto Heaven. If it was a complete world, such a crushing impact would be enough to make the world collapse and return to a state similar to the state of chaos. However, at this moment, the complete world was still evolving. The 296 billion square meters Grotto Heaven worlds were still intertwining in the process of merging. It itself was in a state similar to the state of chaos. Under such circumstances, how could the 365 giant stars continue to be destroyed? As a result, they were directly enveloped by the world. Apart from making the evolution of the world more difficult and requiring more methods to guide it, they did not cause any more damage. Even so, Hong Jun still did not feel any joy, because he knew that the next moment would be the time for the challenge. As expected, after the 365 giant stars, endless power poured into the world along with the 365 giant stars. Endless space-time fragments swarmed towards the world and crazily entered the world behind the 365 giant stars. At this moment, Hong Jun's expression had already stiffened, and his eyes had become extremely dull. Only the power surged like boiling, charging at the surrounding void and charging at everything that existed in the primordial world. Obviously, he'd placed all his thoughts and attention on the space above him, and he'd placed all his attention on the space above him. He'd placed all his attention on the space above him, and he'd placed all his attention on the 296 billion square abode worlds that were fusing together. It was precisely because of this that he couldn't even spare a trace of insignificant thought to control his body. Thus, he revealed such a stiff and dazed expression at this moment. The magic power in his body kept gushing out of his body, drilling into the void. Through all kinds of incredible changes, he worked hard to stimulate his own mind, making his mind continuously stronger. At the same time, his body was constantly being consumed. Just a little more, just a little more. After an unknown period of time, a subtle thought suddenly flashed through Hong Jun's mind. When the thought flashed through Hong Jun's mind, sweat poured out of his body that had completely lost control like rain. Then, the void trembled, and the entire primordial world trembled. In a daze, there seemed to be a mysterious ball of light appearing in the sky. The ball of light was extremely tiny at first, and it could not even be called a ball. It could only be called a dot. However, as time passed, the ball of light became more and more intense, and at the same time, it became bigger and bigger. In a short while, it had already turned into the shape of a disk. There were also countless gaps in the ball of light, causing the ball of light to not seem complete. Instead, it seemed to be formed by a number of dots of light and a number of balls of light, barely forming a ball of light. When the ball of light appeared, Hong Jun let out a long breath. All of his thoughts and power instantly returned to his body, like a turtle retracting its head. After his body obtained the thoughts and power, it seemed to have completely lost its strength. It directly lost the power to float, and like a stone, it suddenly sank down. Master, I've finally completed the task. There's nothing I can do about the rest. Please forgive me, Master. At this moment, an extremely weak thought flashed through Hong Jun's mind. When this thought flashed through his mind, his body had already been completely engulfed by the boundless primordial qi, and he was sent to the deepest part of the solid primordial qi. Just like the other surviving, living beings in the primordial world, he was completely sealed in the primordial qi, and his mind and will directly entered the deepest state of silence. The power in his body slowly flowed, and he began to frantically absorb the endless primordial qi from the outside world to refine and replenish himself. However, previously his mental power and dharma power had been exhausted to the limit, and he finally could not hold on anymore. Therefore, he instinctively entered the deepest state of meditation. Well done. The moment he entered the deepest state of meditation, a leisurely sigh entered his ears from somewhere. This voice naturally could not be the voice of anyone else. It was the voice that Luo Fan had made at the lowest level of the primordial world. At this moment, Luo Fan floated at the core of the netherworld ocean. He raised his head, and his gaze directly passed through the 12,960,000 kilometers of ground and the 12,960,000 kilometers of sky. Through the barrier of time and space, he directly saw the original location of the Dharma Power Passage. He saw the world that Hong Jun had worked hard to complete with all his might. After working hard for an unknown period of time, Hong Jun finally managed to fuse the 296 billion square grotto heaven world into one under the condition that it contained the endless starry sky space fragments, the endless destructive power of the starry sky, and a heavenly cycle star formation formed by 365 stars into one, turning it into a world. Although this world was still extremely incomplete, and it was still in a strange state similar to the state of chaos, and it was still constantly expanding and evolving, all the grotto heaven worlds had already been intertwined within it. All the changes that followed would only happen within this world, and the world would not naturally develop to the point where it would engulf the entire primordial world. To the entire primordial world, this was naturally only half done. However, to Hong Jun, it could be said that he had completed his mission of mending the heavens. What I need to do next is to combine the top and bottom, form a complete form, and support this world. When Luo Fan saw this, an incomparably solemn expression appeared on his face, and that was what he thought in his mind. At this moment, at the lowest level of the primordial world, the 18 spacetimes had already been completely squeezed into the primordial world, completely fusing into the boundless yellow sea that covered the entire primordial world. Above him, the entire endless starry sky, apart from the shattered parts, had already fused into the mysterious world formed by the 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds. The original function of these two was to protect the primordial world, separating the primordial world from the state of chaos, so that the primordial world would not be directly engulfed by the state of chaos. At this moment, without these two, the primordial world would naturally be able to survive for a short period of time. However, as time passed, the state of chaos would definitely break through the remaining barriers and directly break into the primordial world, turning the primordial world into chaos. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted the primordial world to survive, what he needed to do was to make up for everything and support this world. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 694. As Luo Fan's thoughts spun, the will that he had attached to the yellow sea intertwined with the boundless magic power around the world formed by the 296 billion square grotto heavens above the primordial world in a subtle way. Text first. As the two intertwined, the world and the yellow sea began to resonate in an unbelievable manner. The resonance caused a mysterious connection to form between the two poles of the primordial world. The yuan qi, time, and space between them flowed and fused in a mysterious manner. The fusion produced an incredible and mysterious power that caused both the Yellow Sea and the world to gradually change. The change in the world was that the originally gray and chaotic state began to gradually disappear. Boundless space-time was born within it. There was no sky, land, or even matter in this space-time. It directly evolved into an increasingly vast void. The void continued to expand. In the blink of an eye, the originally crowded 365 stars became more and more spacious, and the distance between them became greater and greater. The primordial world constantly trembled during this process. The extremely thick yuan qi that had piled up on the primordial world gradually collapsed under the trembling, and it constantly dissipated. The yuan qi that dissipated did not accumulate in the primordial world. Instead, it charged up and continuously seeped into the upper layer of the primordial world, into the vast and boundless void that was growing larger and larger. Although the expansion of the void was the result of the resonance between the two poles, it did not mean that the process of change did not require energy to be replenished, and it could continue to expand through the resonance. In reality, it was the opposite. The result of the resonance was that the energy needed for the expansion was countless times greater than the natural evolution. Under such circumstances, the energy contained in the world formed by the 296 billion square grotto heavens was far from enough. After a short while, when the void formed by the world covered the entire upper layer of the primordial world and completely covered the sky of the primordial world, the nearly endless energy contained within it was completely exhausted. But at this moment, the power of resonance still existed, allowing the Yellow Sea and this world to continue evolving. Therefore, it needed to absorb endless energy from the outside world to maintain the power of this resonance, so that the power of this resonance would not fall into nothing, so that the changes in the Yellow Sea and that world would stop, resulting in unpredictable consequences. Fortunately, countless stars had fallen into the primordial world during this period of time. Naturally, it produced an unimaginable amount of primordial energy, which was enough to sustain the consumption. However, even though he had sufficient origin qi, the impact from the collapse and influx of origin qi had also brought about shocking consequences. There is a strange barrier between the primordial world and the original endless starry sky. This barrier separated the two space-times, making them relatively independent and thus incomparably stable. To be able to have such a miraculous effect, there was naturally no need to mention the profoundness of this barrier. If there were no changes and the barrier existed, it would be almost impossible for the primordial qi of the primordial world to break through the barrier. But at this moment, the situation was naturally completely different. At this moment, although the barrier still existed, the endless starry sky had completely shattered and disappeared. Originally, the primordial world and the endless starry sky had suppressed each other and balanced each other, maintaining the endless mysteries of the barrier. At this moment, the balance had been lost, so it was naturally broken. The strength of the barrier was naturally many times weaker than before. In addition, the world formed by the 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds had spread out in the barrier, naturally causing a new round of damage to the barrier. As a result, under the impact of the endless power and origin qi, countless dense cracks appeared on the barrier like spider webs, completely enveloping the entire sky of the primordial world. The cracks became denser and more obvious. At some point in time, the sky of the entire untainted land suddenly collapsed. Countless fragments of the sky shrunk from big to small and finally turned into extremely fine smoke. Along with the endless primordial qi and power, they surged into the void formed by the 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens in the sky. Boundless light instantly spread across the entire primordial world as the sky shattered. It instantly changed the situation of the primordial world, which could only be illuminated by the solid origin qi. The entire primordial world became extremely dazzling. If ordinary living beings were here, they would definitely be charred by the light in an instant and eventually turn into nothingness. This light contained the boundless essence of the stars, the true fire of the sun, the essence of the sun, and the essence of the moon. It was the light formed by the essence of the stars emitted by the 365 stars, shining down without any obstruction. At this moment, in the lower layer of the primordial world, the yellow sea that covered the entire lower layer of the primordial world, which seemed to be dragging down the entire primordial world, also underwent an earth-shattering change. Previously, when the resonance had occurred, the 18 spacetimes formed by the 18 layers of hell in the yellow sea had undergone a strange change in an unimaginable manner. The degree of their fusion with the netherworld spring water had deepened at an astonishing speed. As the fusion deepened, the space-time formed by the fusion of the two gradually underwent various inexplicable changes. Faintly, the space-time gradually transformed into the original nature of the 18 layers of hell. In other words, to the primordial world, the space became narrower and narrower, while to the spirit bodies, souls, and wills, the space-time became wider and wider. Of course, after all, it had fused with the netherworld spring water. After the fusion, the space-time was not completely like the 18 layers of hell. Instead, it weakened the chaos of time countless times, making it extremely stable. It also gave birth to countless strange, muddle-headed spirits. They were like the strange creatures that had naturally formed in the netherworld's spring water, and they roamed the strange space. The growth of the space within a complete space-time and the change of time would not appear in many forms in the outside world. As a result, to the outside world, the yellow sea was still the same as before. From above, it still looked like a huge door that led to the virtual world. If someone could pass through this barrier and see the real yellow sea below, they would discover that the yellow sea seemed to be strangely compressed. The thickness of the yellow sea was gradually thinning, but its stability was increasing at an unimaginable speed. When the endless primordial chi above broke through the sky and the light from the 365 giant stars shone down, the changes in the entire yellow sea increased by tens of thousands of times. In the blink of an eye, the entire yellow sea was compressed into a thin piece of yellow paper. When it merged with the mirror, it was like a strange and unbelievable piece of paper. This kind of change produced an endless traction force. This traction was not targeted at any existence in the primordial world. Instead, it was targeted at the netherworld network that Luo Fan had set up. At this moment, it was attached to the virtual world above the yellow sea. This traction was extremely powerful. It covered every inch of the virtual world and searched every location within the infinite light years of the virtual world. It continuously pulled some extremely special life imprints out of the virtual world, causing them to gradually leave the virtual world and flow into the thin, paper-like yellow sea. These life imprints were none other than the life imprints that Luo Fan had left behind when the living beings of the primordial world had died with the supreme power of the virtual world. Although this life imprint only occupied an extremely small portion of the endless life in the primordial world, its absolute number had already reached an almost infinite level. Under this traction, the yellow sea seemed to be covered in a rainstorm of life imprints. Endless life imprints surged into the strange space-time and continuously fused with the seawater in the yellow sea, forming endless illusory living beings. These illusory living beings seemed to be almost the same as the endless living beings that had existed in the yellow sea and wandered endlessly. However, as long as one paid attention to them, they would discover that they were completely different existences. The living beings born from the combination of the life imprint and the seawater were extremely clear. They did not feel muddle-headed at all. It was as if the living beings that had existed in the primordial world had only changed their bodies. How could those muddle-headed living beings compare to them? However, although the living beings born from the life imprint and the seawater appeared clear, there was a lot of confusion in their clarity. It was a kind of confusion that one did not know where they were or what they were. Obviously, these life imprints did not bring down their memories of living in the primordial world. Even their memories of living in the virtual world did not come with them. Luo Fan thought about it and could not help but praise it in his heart. Of course, the changes in the Yellow Sea weren't under his control. Although he had thought of returning the life imprints of the endless living beings of the primordial world that had been preserved in the virtual world to the primordial world through some methods, that was only an idea. It had to depend on the situation after the primordial world had completely evolved in the future. It would definitely not be like this. The primordial world was still evolving and changing, so the imprints would return to the primordial world in another form. At this moment, the changes in the Yellow Sea had directly solved the problem that Luo Fan had to think of ways to solve in the future. Although the Yellow Sea was not the true primordial world, it had an extremely close connection with the primordial world. It could be predicted that through some strange transformation, the life that lived in the Yellow Sea would definitely be able to transform into the life on the primordial world. Similarly, the life on the primordial world would definitely be able to transform into the life in the Yellow Sea through some kind of change. So that's how it is. This Yellow Sea is actually the netherworld. This thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. As soon as this thought appeared, Luo Fan had a more complete grasp of the evolution of the primordial world. He no longer had any doubts about the evolution of the sky, how the world flowed, and how the entire primordial world was supported. As this change occurred, his thoughts changed slightly. The boundless void above the primordial world began to change in a mysterious way. As the void became wider and wider, more and more condensed star essence chi began to condense within it. Each of these star essence condensed bodies had different properties from the others. The mysteries contained in each star essence condensed body faintly formed some kind of mysterious supplement with the other star essence condensed bodies. After these star essence condensed bodies appeared, they did not randomly distribute in the boundless void. Instead, they began to attach themselves to the heavenly cycle star formation formed by the 365 giant stars in an extremely mysterious way. Every moment, there would be billions of star essence condensed bodies appearing in the void, and they would be distributed in the mysterious void around the 365 giant stars. They were in accordance with the mysteries of the heavenly cycle star formation, allowing the heavenly cycle star formation to expand and strengthen in some way. However, although these star essence condensed bodies possessed some of the characteristics of the original stars, they were only star essence condensed bodies after all. There was still a huge difference between them and the real stars. Therefore, this kind of supplement to the formation was extremely weak. It barely made the heavenly cycle star formation formed by the 365 giant stars restrain the star essence that it emitted. This made the light that the primordial world endured less fatal, although it was still extremely dazzling. The speed at which the star essence condensed bodies appeared was unimaginably fast. After an unknown period of time, the number of star essence condensed bodies had reached an endless level, completely filling the void formed by the 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens. In a trance, standing in the primordial world and looking up, a boundless starry sky reappeared above. There were countless stars twinkling in it. Among the endless stars, there were 365 stars that were millions of times larger than the other stars. They were distributed in all directions of the starry sky, forming a strange formation that connected the endless stars in the starry sky together like veins. It allowed the endless stars in the starry sky to form an extremely complete and exquisite whole. During this process of change, the dazzling light that the primordial world endured gradually weakened. At this moment, after the star essence condensed bodies no longer appeared, the light had weakened to the point where it was daytime before the world changed. The amount of star essence that was scattering down from the sky had almost completely disappeared, becoming extremely thin. It was almost the complete opposite of what it was at the beginning. The reason for such a change was very simple. At this moment, The boundless essence of the stars emanated by the 365 stars had been completely absorbed into the universe stellar formation that had expanded by countless times. In other words, all of the star essence had already been absorbed into the formation and converted into energy to maintain the integrity of the formation. The heavenly cycle star formation that was originally formed by 365 stars was the core of the stars in the sky. The connection between them was unimaginably tight, and they were almost completely condensed into one. Naturally, there was no need for any power to maintain their structure. Instead, under that structure, they could continuously spread out endless energy. This was also the reason why the primordial world had such a huge amount of star essence at the beginning. However, at this moment, the situation was completely different from before. At this moment, the universe stellar formation had already drawn over the boundless condensed energy of the stars, causing its scale to expand by countless trillions of times. If this kind of expansion was completely constructed by the stars, then the result would naturally be to recreate the starry sky and reproduce the mysteries of the endless starry sky. It would produce endless star essence that filled the void and even spread across the primordial world. However, at this moment, a large part of the formation, or almost all of it, was just condensed bodies of star essence. There was still an indescribable distance between them and real stars. If there was no endless power connecting them, these condensed bodies of star essence would not be able to replace the role of the stars and recreate the huge and complete heavenly cycle star formation. As a result, the sky was filled with stars. However, the star essence in the primordial world was so thin that it was almost non-existent. It was naturally impossible for the primordial world to remain the same since such a huge change had occurred in the void. In fact, during the process of the change in the void, the changes in the primordial world were not any smaller than the changes in the void. Under this change, the entire primordial world was completely different from before. The thick, solid yuan qi that covered every inch of the void in the entire primordial world had completely disappeared under this change. All the yuan qi and energy contained within had turned invisible and rushed into the newly created starry sky above. A portion of it was converted into the power to open up the void, and a portion of it was converted into the endless star essence condensed by the condensed body of star essence. There was no need to look at anything else. Just from the stars that filled the sky and the boundless starry sky, it was enough to tell how much energy was consumed during the entire process. Such a huge amount of energy was completely extracted from the primordial world. How could the density of the primordial world's yuan qi still maintain its original unbelievable state? Hashtag Chapter 695. As a result, during the process of change, the concentration of primordial qi in the entire untainted world had already been reduced to 100 times that of when there was no change at all. Text starter, no advertisements, full text. Updates, although such a concentration of primordial qi was extremely rich and was enough to enlighten any living being, it could no longer condense into a liquid state, let alone a solid state. At this moment, the untainted world, the starry sky, and the netherworld naturally circulated. Waves of indescribable mystical power were constantly alternating between the two. During this process, the starry sky and the netherworld became extremely sturdy. It was enough to withstand the endless pressure of power. Gradually, the entire untainted world stabilized. It no longer had the feeling of drifting and having no one to rely on. Obviously, during the process of its natural circulation, endless mysterious power was generated, supporting the untainted world. At this moment, Luo Fan heaved a long sigh of relief. He loosened his hand, and the core of the netherworld network in his hand shrank. It was directly sucked into the surrounding netherworld, which seemed to have no thickness to the outside world. As the core entered, the netherworld shook violently. Then the entire yellow sea suddenly shrank inwards. It looked like it was about to drown Luo Fan in the netherworld. Seeing this, Luo Fan did not care at all. He lifted his foot and took a light step, stepping out of the netherworld and directly arriving at the land above the netherworld. Lowering his head to take a look, the place where there was originally a gap in the core that revealed the boundless darkness below was gradually submerged by the mirror-like door. The entire mirror, or rather, the entire door, no longer had any gaps. It became incomparably perfect. As it changed, the core of the virtual world flashed past the place where it had just formed. After appearing for a moment, it completely disappeared, as if it did not exist at all. That place only revealed the pitch-black void of the virtual world. When this change appeared, the netherworld under the mirror-like scene also underwent countless unbelievable changes. In an instant, all the living beings born in the netherworld, regardless of whether they were transformed from the life imprints of the living beings in the untainted land or the living beings born naturally in the netherworld, had endless information appear in their spiritual senses. The amount of information wasn't much, but it contained all the knowledge they needed to survive in the netherworld, and it contained all sorts of profound principles that were sufficient for them to step onto the path of cultivation. The appearance of this information was like a lamp that had been lit up in the boundless darkness. To the countless living beings that lived in the netherworld, it was so great that it had arrived at an indescribable state. This allowed every living being born in the netherworld to instantly understand what kind of existence they were, and many living beings even determined their own survival goals. Of course, the ones who benefited the most were the living beings formed by the life imprints of the living beings in the primordial world. After all, even though they had completely lost all of their past memories and consciousness, they still once possessed a complete spiritual sense and a complete consciousness. Their ability to understand information was naturally stronger than the natives of the netherworld, so they naturally obtained more. Among them, there were even living beings who had been extremely powerful in the past who directly comprehended the cultivation method. As a result, they drew in endless spiritual chi of the netherworld and poured into their bodies. Their aura instantly skyrocketed, and they directly stepped onto the path of cultivation. Apart from the changes in the spiritual senses of all the living beings in the netherworld that had appeared out of thin air, there was an even greater and more obvious change in the netherworld. At the center of the netherworld, a strange circular prototype appeared out of thin air. The circular prototype was millions of kilometers in diameter, and it floated in mid-air as it slowly rotated. As it was only a prototype, the circular disc was still extremely incomplete. Although it could roughly be seen that it was in the shape of a disc, its form was extremely unstable. It constantly fluctuated, as if it could collapse at any time, but it managed to gather itself together. As the disc rotated, the entire netherworld seemed to resonate, and there was a faint sense of contraction. Boundless spiritual chi of the netherworld gathered towards the shape of the disc from all over the netherworld, as if it was constantly replenishing the disc, gradually making it complete. After the disc was formed, the living beings in the netherworld faintly felt a strange summoning, calling them to head towards the location of the disc. Fortunately, the summoning was so weak that it was almost undetectable, so it did not cause any unpredictable consequences. At that moment, a part of Luo Fan's consciousness remained in the Yellow Sea, which was also the netherworld. As a result, he was completely confident about the changes in the netherworld. The appearance of the disc was immediately seen by him. Seeing the disc, Luo Fan's expression showed that he had expected it, and a faint smile appeared on his face. So this is the prototype of the 6 paths of reincarnation. It looks like it will naturally take shape with the passage of time, and there's no longer a need for powerful beings to transform into it. Looking at the various changes, Luo Fan knew that he no longer needed to control all the changes, and he was finally completely at ease. With a slight thought, the consciousness that was dissolved in the Yellow Sea was retracted into his body. Then he took a step and directly crossed 12,960,000 kilometers of the ground, arriving on the ground. As soon as he arrived on the ground, the vastness of the entire untainted world rushed towards him. In an instant, he felt his heart open up. Although he had a clear understanding of the huge changes in the entire untainted world with his consciousness, it was the first time for Luo Fan to feel such changes with his own eyes. Obviously, sensing with one's mind was completely different from directly observing with one's eyes. At that moment, he was floating in the air thousands of kilometers above the ground. He raised his head and looked around. The boundless land, the boundless ocean, and the boundless sky instantly poured into his eyes. The land was magnified 10 times on the previous, almost infinite basis. The shock was not something that could be expressed in words. Although Luo Fan was already at the peak of the Daoyuo dispersed Dao, he could not suppress the shock brought by this boundless grandeur. He only felt that his body and mind seemed to be baptized by this grandeur, and even his mind and thoughts were much clearer. Taking a deep breath, the vast and boundless aura swarmed over. Combined with the boundless and grand scene in front of him, it increased the shock in his mind. As for the change in the concentration of primordial qi in the void that had the greatest impact on all living beings, it had the least impact on Luo Fan. After all, with Luo Fan's current ability, he could produce innate primordial qi that was enough to fill a minor kiliocosm with a single thought. He could completely replenish all the spiritual power consumed in his body with a single thought. The changes in the primordial qi in the outside world were meaningless to him. Not to mention that the concentration of primordial qi in the untainted land had only increased by 100 times. Even if it increased by tens of millions of times, he would not pay too much attention to it. Feeling the shock in his heart, Luo Fan's thought moved slightly, and his figure turned into a long rainbow and rushed straight up. The speed of this long rainbow was not fast. Even to Luo Fan, it could only be regarded as a snail, but it had reached the peak speed that could be achieved at the level of the earthly, immortal Tao fruit. In just an instant, he crossed the distance of 12,960,000 kilometers and came to the boundary between the untainted land and the starry sky. He landed and transformed into the figure of Luo Fan again. Sure enough, just as he had sensed before, there was no gap between the untainted land and the starry sky. That was to say, although the untainted land and the starry sky were two different spacetimes, the untainted land was created by Pangu when he created the world, and the starry sky was formed by the integration and transformation of 1,296,000,000 square worlds. However, under the effect of some extremely mysterious and profound principle, the two spacetimes were seamlessly connected. It was extremely easy to pass through any barrier and enter the starry sky from the untainted land without causing any changes. Similarly, it was extremely easy to pass through any barrier and enter the untainted land from the starry sky without causing any changes. To a certain extent, the two spacetimes had become one. The reason why Luo Fan used the unacceptably inefficient method of transforming into a long rainbow to travel was to carefully feel the changes in the untainted land compared to the past. It was also through this kind of personal and detailed perception, coupled with a little speculation, that he guessed that the sky of the untainted land would completely merge with the untainted land. That was why he was not surprised at this moment. Instead, he seemed to have everything under control. He raised his foot and took a step. He did not use any magical powers, and did not even use the special power that he had after achieving the Zenith Heaven Scattered Tao. He easily crossed the gap between the untainted land and the starry sky, like an ordinary person walking. As soon as he crossed, he felt the difference between the two. He also sensed the secret behind the combination of the untainted land and the starry sky. However, due to the special structure of the starry sky, there was only the void, no land, no sky. It could even be said that there was no top, no bottom, no left, and no right. It was not complete, nor could it be independent. Therefore, it needed an attachment to allow it to exist forever. And here, the best and only attachment could only be the untainted land. As a result, the void naturally attached itself to the untainted land. It was also because the barrier of the void had been completely broken, so the void was directly connected to the space-time of the untainted land. After that, because it came into contact with the space-time of the untainted land during the change. It was directly affected by the space-time of the untainted land. As a result, the space-time that was close to the untainted land was assimilated by the untainted land. Clearly, it was because of this assimilation that the starry sky could be seamlessly connected to the untainted land. Luo Fan's perception was extremely sharp. Standing in the starry sky, he easily discovered the difference between the space-time of the starry sky and the space-time of the untainted land. After all, it was only a space-time that had been assimilated by the space-time of the untainted land. It was impossible for it to be the same as the space-time of the untainted land. Apart from the fact that it could not contain all sorts of mysteries like the space-time of the untainted land, which could not be broken without reaching a certain realm, the biggest difference between the starry sky and the untainted land was that it was in a gradual process. The further away from the untainted land, the more different the starry sky would be from the untainted land. The space would be weaker, and the laws would be more different. According to the extent of the changes he had sensed in these few steps, as long as he was more than 1 billion kilometers away, the space, time, laws, and laws of the starry sky would no longer be similar to the untainted land. They would completely become two independent space-time. The starry sky was boundless. The distance of 1 billion kilometers was not much thicker than the thickness of a piece of paper. From this point of view, perhaps the distance of 1 billion kilometers could be regarded as the barrier between the untainted land and the starry sky. It seemed that compared to the endless starry sky, it was just a slight change in the form of the barrier. There seemed to be no difference. However, that was obviously not the case. The starry sky was qualitatively different from the endless starry sky before. The endless starry sky before was also boundless and vast. However, from the untainted land, it looked more like a curtain. Standing in the primordial world, as long as one could send their perception into the endless starry sky, regardless of their perception ability, they would be able to easily sense everything in the endless starry sky from the primordial world to the end of the straight line in the endless starry sky. Although they could not really come into contact with the end, it was already extremely similar to looking at a painting. At that moment, the starry sky was different. At that moment, the starry sky was no different from the untainted land in terms of the perception of living beings. If living beings wanted to completely include the distance of the starry sky in their perception, they would need to increase their cultivation realm and their perception ability to an unbelievable level. Otherwise, he might be able to sense a larger area in the starry sky due to the difference in space and time, but it would be impossible for him to sense everything like before. That was the most obvious and easiest difference between the endless starry sky and the starry sky. Apart from that difference, there was an even more obscure, difficult to discover, and even greater difference. It was the range of the starry sky. In the past, in the endless starry sky, the untainted land was just like a strange star. Standing in the endless starry sky and looking around, there was only endless void and endless stars. It was like a universe like the universe on Earth. In the starry sky after the change, no matter where he was, as long as he looked down, he would be able to see the untainted land below. Moreover, no matter how far he walked or how many billions of kilometers he flew, as long as he was in a straight line, the size of the untainted land would not change at all. It was also displayed in an overwhelming manner, causing anyone to be shocked, feel small, and even despair. Such a change was only on the surface. The reason for this appearance was the difference between the existence of the endless starry sky and the existence of the starry sky at that moment. Intuitively, to the endless starry sky, the untainted land was like a sphere, like a relatively special star among the endless stars inside. The special thing was that this star seemed to be completely formed by countless Buzhou mountains surrounding it to form a sphere. No matter which direction he set off in, he could only reach the location of the untainted land by Buzhou Mountain. Unless a cultivator could leave the so-called spatial coordinates in the untainted land, he could not directly tear open the void and arrive at the corresponding location of the spatial coordinates in the untainted land from the endless starry sky. Otherwise, he would definitely not be able to reach any location other than the top of Bujo Mountain by flying in the endless starry sky. Although, that was nonsense. Any living being who dared to step into the endless starry sky would definitely leave spatial coordinates in the untainted land. However, that was the truth. It would not change because no one did it. From another perspective, it would mean that the living beings in the untainted land would break through the barrier between the endless starry sky and the untainted land and enter the endless starry sky from any direction. When he looked back, the untainted land closest to him would definitely be Bujo Mountain. It was the same even if he had torn open the barrier and stepped into the endless starry sky, which was the farthest southeast from Bujo Mountain. At that moment, the starry sky was completely different from the endless starry sky. At that moment, the untainted land was the biggest support point for the starry sky. It was the key to its existence, and it was also a space-time that was wider than the entire endless starry sky. This difference in meaning naturally made the untainted land not seem like a strange planet from the perspective of the starry sky. At that moment, if one moved horizontally in the starry sky, the position of the untainted land would also move along with it. The distance it moved was definitely the same as the distance it moved between the starry sky. Of course, because the starry sky was boundless in all directions, when one moved close to the end of the untainted land in the starry sky, as long as it was space-time, as long as it was heaven and earth, there would be an end, and the untainted land was no exception. The corresponding method of distance would naturally change. At that time, moving between the endless starry sky would also cause the distance to increase between the untainted land and the untainted land. However, no matter how one moved, they would not be able to reach the end of the untainted land unless a living being could break through the barrier of the untainted land, break through the shackles of the untainted land, and step into the chaotic state. Luo Fan had a very intuitive metaphor for this situation. The distance between the endless starry sky was like the y-axis of the function of y equals 1/x, and the distance between the untainted land and the untainted land was like the x-axis of this function. When x approached the end and was close to 0, y could still grow infinitely. However, no matter how it grew, x could not really be 0. All these thoughts flashed across Luo Fan's mind and did not even really attract his attention. After all, these differences were almost like common sense to Luo Fan. Naturally, he would not specially look for some explanations for these common sense. At this moment, Luo Fan stood in the starry sky and looked around, carefully sensing the various changes in the starry sky. He sensed how the 365 giant stars had an effect on the endless condensed essence of the stars, making them grow stronger and finally become real stars. At this moment, an indescribably wonderful feeling came from his Dharma power that spread throughout the starry sky. An outsider? In an instant, Luo Fan's expression changed drastically, and such a thought flashed across his mind. Hashtag Chapter 696. The reason why Luo Fan had such a change in expression at this moment was because his Fa Li that was scattered across the entire starry sky had suddenly been touched by something that should have never appeared before. It was a kind of touch that came from the outside. This starry sky was in the untainted world. It was a boundless and mysterious place that contained billions of stars. Text first. For the untainted world, the Dharma power that Luo Fan had spread outside the starry sky could only have been touched from the untainted world. In other words, it had been touched from the inside out. From this, one could tell that the touch from the outside did not come from the untainted world. Instead, it came from outside the untainted world. It came from a supreme existence that was far away from the untainted world. It actually came from outside the untainted world. Could it be that a saint-level existence from the Julie Great World has already crossed the infinite space and arrived here? Luo Fan's expression changed drastically. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. In a state of chaos, the existence of space and time was incomparably mysterious. It could contain countless worlds that could not even be described with numbers. It was countless times more worlds than the sands of the Ganges River. Even if one calculated according to the smallest and most remote probability, The number of worlds that existed in the state of chaos that were as vast as the untainted world must have reached an infinite level. However, there was boundless chaos between any two worlds. Those who were not saint-level existences could not enter and exit at will. Therefore, only saint-level existences could travel between the two worlds. Therefore, when he sensed that an existence from outside the untainted world had invaded the untainted world, the first thing that came to Luo Fan's mind was a saint-level existence. As for why it was the Jili Great World, it was naturally even simpler. The only existence that was heading towards the untainted world was the existence of the Jili Great World. Therefore, this thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Fortunately, Luo Fan's mind was firm after all. This horrifying thought did not really linger in his mind for too long. In the blink of an eye, his mind had already returned to a calm state. With a thought, he took a step forward, and in an instant, he was already deep in the starry sky. It was a place that was almost at the end of the starry sky, a place that was billions of miles away from the untainted land. This was the place where Luo Fan's Dharma power was touched. As soon as he arrived, Luo Fan was completely relieved. So, it's not a saint-level existence. It's just a Zenith realm cultivator. It's just a Zenith realm cultivator. It's just a Zenith realm cultivator and Zenith realm cultivator. It's just a Zenith realm cultivator. No matter what technique was cultivated in the golden immortal realm, even if it was a cultivator that cultivated a technique that was countless times more exquisite and profound than the Dao fruit Grand Dao Luo Fan cultivated, the cultivator would absolutely be unable to endure the crushing of a single finger of an existence that had attained the saint realm by cultivating the worst technique. Therefore, even though he did not know what realm the Zenith realm cultivator was at and how much stronger he was, Luo Fan was still relieved. He was no longer filled with despair. As long as he was not a saint-level expert, he was not invincible, and he still had a chance to win. In the sky, there was a living being that was 30 meters tall, had 8 arms, and had 3 eyes on each side. Although this living being was extremely ugly in Luo Fan's sense of beauty, it had an extremely profound aura around it. This aura was lofty, vast, and indescribably noble. It caused this body and appearance that was extremely ugly in Luo Fan's sense of beauty to become so natural. He did not feel any disgust towards it, and he even had the misconception that this appearance was true beauty. When this feeling arose, Luo Fan instantly understood that the existence before him was definitely more powerful than him in terms of cultivation. Only in this way would the aura and aura it emanated be able to give him such a misconception. At this moment, Luo Fan was already at the peak of the Golden Dipper realm. This existence's cultivation was even more powerful than his, so it was at least in the Golden Dipper realm, and it was even possible that it was in the Golden Dipper realm. This world seems to be different from what Master said. A strange voice that sounded like a language came out of the giant's mouth. This language was so complicated and profound, yet Luo Fan instantly received the thoughts contained within it and understood the meaning of these words. After he understood the meaning of these words, Luo Fan was finally completely convinced that this existence was from the Ninely world. This was because, although Luo Fan did not fully understand these words, he had heard them more than once. When he first met the living beings of the Ninely world, he had heard these words. Later on, the will that had come through space had also said the same words. Ordinary people could roughly distinguish if they had heard a certain language once, let alone Luo Fan, who was already at the peak of the Golden Dipper realm. Are you a cultivator of this world? At this moment, the existence's body shook, and the 12 eyes on its face suddenly opened. An inexplicable light flashed through them, and they directly locked onto the space where Luo Fan was at. The mouth that had spoken before spat out these words. Although Luo Fan had already come to this place and arrived next to the 4-faced, 8-armed existence, he did not truly show himself. Instead, he used his absolute control over the starry sky to hide in the void. This method of hiding was extremely profound, and its concealment ability was astonishingly powerful. When he hid here, it was as if he was in another space-time. Not to mention any fluctuations, even time and space were completely avoided by him. He would not cause any changes. With this kind of concealment method, he had absolute confidence that even an existence with a higher cultivation realm than him would not be able to discover him. At this moment, he was seen through by this existence with a glance, and even directly pointed it out. This made Luo Fan unable to help but be surprised. Although he was shocked, Luo Fan's Taoist heart was, after all, complete. In an instant, he calmed himself down. His body trembled, and he left his hidden state. He directly appeared at a position hundreds of feet away from the existence, facing it from a distance. He floated there and said indifferently, "Are you a cultivator from the Ninely world? May I ask why you have come to my untainted land?" As for the existence's question about whether he was a cultivator of this world, Luo Fan naturally did not bother to answer. It was already extremely obvious. If he was not a cultivator of this world, why would he appear here? Haha, looks like the person Master spoke of is indeed you. Just as Luo Fan expected, the language he used was the most ordinary untainted land language. It did not even contain a trace of profoundness, nor did it contain any strong intent to explain. However, the existence also easily understood the language like Luo Fan. The existence smiled, and the light in its eyes burned brighter. Luo Fan frowned slightly. The behavior of the existence in front of him was a bit strange. It did not seem to be in a hurry to do anything, and only stood there. A few million years ago, Master traveled through the chaos and discovered this world. At that time, he said that this world has the potential to grow into a great world. As long as it can survive 9 great tribulations, it can become a great world. I didn't expect that in just a few million years, this world has already passed through 2 great tribulations of the world and is one step closer to becoming a great world. The existence seemed to be quite emotional, and the mouth that had spoken before spoke again. Hearing this existence's words, Luo Fan could not help but be moved. Although the attitude of the existence was quite strange, what it said completely aroused his interest. So the existence of the great tribulation of the world is actually a test for a world to grow. After 9 great tribulations of the world, can a world grow into a big world? That seems a bit more difficult. This thought uncontrollably appeared in Luo Fan's mind. The existence was still immersed in emotion. Its 12 eyes shone brightly and vaguely seemed to shine through the untainted land, the netherworld, and the starry sky. It has actually developed to this extent. How is this possible? How can 2 great tribulations achieve this? Clear and turbid flow. Strange power is born. The world is stable, and there is no worry for billions of years. This should be a state that can only be achieved after 4 great tribulations. Could it be that I sensed wrong, and this world has actually survived 4 great tribulations? Impossible. According to the method passed down by Master, it is definitely 2 great tribulations. Could it be? The existence murmured, and its 12 eyes showed surprise. Judging from the way it murmured, it was clear that it did not take Luo Fan seriously at all. It was only immersed in its own world. With this attitude, it was either a madman or it had absolute confidence in itself. Obviously, a powerful existence that could cross the infinite space from a great world to the untainted land could not be a madman. Therefore, the only possibility was that the existence in front of him had absolute confidence in itself. When Luo Fan heard the existence's murmur, an indescribable sense of danger suddenly surged in his heart. The sense of danger was so strong that it made him feel like his entire mind and body was under great pressure. He could not breathe or think. It was such a strong sense of danger, but Luo Fan had no idea where it came from. This made him want to roar at the sky to vent his anger. However, his Taoist heart and mind had reached the great perfection realm. Although he was so oppressed by the sense of crisis, he still kept his mind calm and kept his mind clear. Countless thoughts and countless flashes of light constantly revolved around his mind. Countless possible sources of danger were constantly being deduced by him. As he continued to make deductions, everything pointed to a single final destination. That was what the 4-faced, 8-armed existence in front of him was doing. In an instant, Luo Fan understood that no matter what the existence in front of him was doing, he had to interrupt it. Otherwise, what awaited him and the entire untainted land would be a disaster. After understanding this, how could he still have the slightest hesitation? With a slight thought, the entire starry sky and even the entire untainted land shook slightly. In an instant, there was an infinite power that instantly gathered towards him. He raised his hand and pointed. This boundless power transformed into an invisible and intangible form of existence, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as it rushed towards the giant who was only 1,000 feet away from him. This invisible and intangible power contained all the types of power in the entire untainted land. Its grandeur far exceeded all the power that an existence at the peak of the zenith heaven dispersed Tao could instantly activate. It was almost as if the entire untainted land was crushing the enemy. This power was mysterious and powerful to a certain extent. If the opponent was an existence of the zenith heaven genuine Tao, even if he was a little stronger than Luo Fan, he would not be able to resist this wave of attack. He would definitely die under this wave of attack, and his soul would scatter. Although this was only a kind of power condensation, the truth contained in it was inexplicably profound. This was already the most powerful attack that Luo Fan could condense in a short period of time at this moment. How can existence like Luo Fan, who had a perfect Tao heart and soul, choose to first test out a few moves, then strengthen his offensive bit by bit, and finally, when he reached a point where it was almost irreversible, he would suddenly reveal his trump card, laugh 3 times, and deal with the opponent? Since he had already determined that the opponent was an enemy, he naturally had to condense the most powerful power from the beginning and directly wipe the opponent out from reality. This was not a movie, so how could he drag it out and play house with each other? It's a pity. Why didn't you wait for a while? In a while, I would have been able to completely analyze the great Tao laws of this world and fully unleash my power. At this moment, the existence actually still had the mood to sigh at this moment. The words were spoken slowly, but it seemed to not need any time at all. It directly poured into Luo Fan's ears with great ease, so that Luo Fan could hear every word extremely clearly. At this moment, the power that Luo Fan condensed from almost every position in the entire untainted world had already arrived in front of the existence. It was about to envelop the existence and completely mince the existence into nothingness. At this moment, the third eye of the existence on each face emitted a ray of purple light at the same time. As soon as the 4 rays of purple light appeared, they emitted an earth-shattering noble aura that spread through every inch of the void in the untainted world. It was as if the 4 rays of purple light were the supreme emperor of the world, the universe, and even the chaos. The world, the universe, and even the state of chaos needed to move under its command. After the 4 rays of purple light left the 4 eyes, they each turned and condensed into a strange seal above the existence's head. The seal was the size of the existence's palm, which was the size of 10 palms of an ordinary person. It floated above the existence's head and slowly rotated. Countless tiny rays of purple light circled above the seal, interweaving into mysterious and strange patterns. These patterns were not talismans, runes, or patterns. Instead, they were extremely strange and mysterious patterns. They seemed to be some kind of text, but they also seemed to be some kind of meaningless line combination that was only for the sake of presenting a certain form. The countless patterns formed by the condensation of the purple light quickly moved around the seal. Each pattern's trajectory and way of movement were complex to an unimaginable degree. Vaguely, they seemed to correspond with the supreme great Tao of the untainted world. Every pattern seemed to be able to trigger some kind of mysterious power from the supreme great Tao, and the circulation of each pattern faintly matched the way the untainted world operated. After the seal appeared, the entire starry sky seemed to be controlled by it. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt as if he had been completely isolated from the starry sky. He felt so out of place in the starry sky. Even though he still had endless power surrounding the starry sky, he could not stop this feeling from appearing. Luo Fan instantly knew that the situation was not good. The magic power in his body shook, and it turned into a long river that instantly rushed towards the seal that suddenly appeared above the head of the existence. Before the supreme power he had condensed could come into contact with the existence, it hit the seal. The reason why Luo Fan's power could be so fast was not because it was stronger than the mysterious power that had condensed all kinds of power in the untainted world. Instead, it was because Luo Fan's power was condensed and born from himself. His control over it was like his control over his own body. Compared to the mysterious power, his control over it was countless times more perfect. That was why he could instantly surpass the mysterious power and attack the seal first. As for why Luo Fan's power could reach the opponent so quickly and why he did not choose it as his first attack, it was because he knew that although his power could attack the opponent faster, with the opponent's unfathomable situation, he could not directly finish off the opponent with the power that he could erupt in an instant. Therefore, he chose to attack with a power that was slightly slower but had endless power that could destroy heaven and earth. It could destroy the soul of a Daluo truth path cultivator in an instant and destroy their body and Dao. As for why he attacked the seal with his power, it was because he could faintly feel the mysterious function of the seal. He knew that if he did not do this, this wave of attack that condensed all kinds of power in the untainted world would not work. I didn't expect you to have already broken away from the world. Fortunately, I met you now. If I was a few 100 million years later, I'm afraid I wouldn't even have the qualifications to stand before you. Just as Luo Fan's FA energy came into contact with the seal, the existence let out such a sigh. Apart from cultivating power, the cultivation of living beings was more important in cultivating the mind. As long as a living being could achieve extraordinary achievements on the path of cultivation, the cultivation of the mind would definitely be extremely outstanding. Although the existence before him was a cultivator from another world, this was no exception. Therefore, after sensing Luo Fan's potential, he would not erase this potential for the sake of his own pride. Instead, he openly expressed that his potential was definitely not comparable to Luo Fan's. He expressed that he was glad that he could meet Luo Fan before he grew up and had the chance to erase him. This attitude made Luo Fan unable to feel any disgust towards the existence, even though they were enemies that would not rest until one of them died. Chapter 697. Although the powerful existence had time to sigh with emotion, he did not have the time to react to Luo Fan's actions. Text first. In the end, Luo Fan's Dharma power still bombarded the seal with infinite power. Dharma power was an extremely mysterious power. This power contained infinite rules, the power of the laws, and endless, unfathomable mysteries. If one wanted to use it to refine techniques, forge weapons, activate the power of heaven and earth, and activate the mysteries of space-time, the form of Dharma power naturally had to undergo various unfathomable changes. However, if one only wanted it to unleash its strongest power, especially when the power of the outside world rejected the owner of the Dharma power, it was the best choice to use the body of the Dharma power to attack. Crack! A rumble that shook every inch of the void in the entire untainted world instantly erupted from the point where the Dharma power and the seal collided, sweeping across the entire untainted world. This rumble was not ordinary. It contained some kind of extremely subtle and mysterious power that was produced when the two collided. This subtle and mysterious power was carried by the sound waves, causing them to instantly turn illusory into reality. Like long dragons, they swam from the point where the two collided to every part of the untainted world. These long dragons even seemed to have faint and weak spiritual consciousness. They could make all kinds of unfathomable and mysterious movements in the process of flying, displaying all kinds of amazing agility. If such a change appeared in other worlds, even if it was a major kiliocosm, the sound waves would be enough to shatter the void and even shatter the entire world and space-time into nothingness. However, at this moment, in the untainted world, these changes were nothing. Even the mountain rocks in the untainted world could not be damaged. They could only collide in vain, shatter in vain, and dissipate in vain. However, they did not cause the slightest damage. Such a strong impact was transmitted to Luo Fan through the Dharma power, causing Luo Fan to feel his body and mind tremble violently. Countless small injuries appeared in his body, and no matter how his Dharma power attacked, they lingered for a long time and refused to disappear. Even Luo Fan's body, which was at the peak of the Daoyuo dispersing Dao, could not remain unscathed from the impact. The seal formed by the purple divine light, naturally, could not ignore such an impact. Therefore, after the impact, the seal formed by the purple light shook slightly. Then, it broke free from the existence's control and floated behind the existence. Although it only floated a few feet away, it was enough for Luo Fan. He used his Dharma power to collide with the seal, so that the seal could not directly affect the power that he had condensed from all kinds of power in the entire untainted world. At this moment, although the seal was not destroyed by his Dharma power, it could no longer directly face that power. Even if it was affected, it was many times weaker than before. Naturally, he had achieved his goal. At this moment, the invisible and colorless energy finally enveloped that existence. At this moment, the seal shook slightly. There was a strange, incomparably dignified, and incomparably noble wave of energy that seemed to be giving out an order. The wave of energy was so incredible. In the area that it swept through, all power instantly became tamed and gentle, no longer having any offensive power. This naturally included the invisible and intangible power that Luo Fan had condensed from all kinds of power in the untainted world. It was incredibly powerful. However, this power was completely different from the essence of the stars in the starry sky. Not only was it hundreds of millions of times more powerful, but it was also strengthened by Luo Fan's will. Its ability to resist the wave of energy could not be compared to the essence of the stars in the surrounding starry sky. In particular, at this moment, the power did not collide head-on with the wave of energy released by the seal. Although the wave of energy affected the seal, it was still separated by the existence. By the time it took effect, it was already too late. The effect was weakened by an unknown number of times. The existence had clearly expected this, but did not place all its hopes on the seal. Its 8 arms spread out in all directions like a large net, wrapping around the power. Although the power had been greatly affected by the wave of energy due to Luo Fan's various actions, it was still affected, and its power was 100 times weaker than before. It was originally an absolute power, but at this moment, it was only SOSO. Although it could still seriously injure the Daoyuo Truth Dao, it was absolutely impossible for it to kill the Daoyuo Truth Dao cultivator, and cause him to perish. At this moment, the existence's 4 faces were inexplicably solemn. Each of its 8 arms drew a mysterious line, which seemed to trigger all the laws and trajectories of the entire untainted world. It seemed to condense all the power of the entire untainted world and collided with the power. On one side was an invisible and unimaginably powerful power, while on the other side were 8 giant arms. These 2 completely different existences should not have been able to collide, but at this moment, when they collided, they produced an effect that could only be produced by 2 tangible existences colliding. An earth-shattering shock spread out in all directions from the point of collision. Countless spatial cracks extended from the 8 arms like spider webs, and in the blink of an eye, it affected the void within a radius of millions of kilometers, completely enveloping the void. These spiderweb-like cracks grew larger and more obvious. In the end, they completely connected and directly shattered the void, revealing an incomparably deep void behind it. Even time did not exist. The invisible and colorless power that Luo Fan condensed from all kinds of power in the entire untainted world completely appeared in the void. It turned into a gray, chaotic color and was directly grabbed by the 8 arms from 8 directions and firmly fixed there. Around this gray power, endless spatial fragments fluttered like snowflakes and even seemed somewhat beautiful. The existence floated in the boundless void with a somewhat strained and solemn expression. Various kinds of power surged out of its body, as if the power in its body had been operated to a certain extreme. Suddenly, the four faces on its head roared at the same time. This roar was extremely loud, causing the spatial fragments to tremble violently. It was as if they had been disturbed by this roar. With this roar, a huge shadow flashed behind the existence. This illusory figure also had the appearance of a giant with 4 faces and 8 arms. It was tens of thousands of feet tall, like a real giant. Looking at its appearance, it was no different from that existence. Obviously, this was an existence similar to the primordial spirit or Dharma idol that cultivators cultivated in the primordial world. Although this shadow only appeared for a moment before disappearing, it produced an incredible effect. In the instant that the shadow appeared, the existence's strength skyrocketed by more than 10,000 times. With a sudden force, the incredible power that Luo Fan condensed was instantly crushed, turning back into the various kinds of power that existed in the untainted world and gradually dissipated. As it dissipated, the fragments of the starry sky gradually gathered together again. Not long later, it had turned into a complete void, and it looked no different from before. At this moment, the power that had dissipated had already returned to the place where Luo Fan had gathered through various mysterious channels. Apart from slight loss, it was as if it had never left. During this period of time, Luo Fan tried his best to suppress the damage in his body. With his current cultivation at the peak of the golden divinity Dispel Tao, he could easily reform any damage to his body, even if his entire body was crushed into powder. It was even to the extent that his magic power, soul, and consciousness wouldn't be exhausted in the slightest. However, the damage he suffered was different. This damage was caused by his Fa Li colliding with the seal formed by the purple light. It was caused by the seal's power. As a result, there was an extremely mysterious power attached to the small damage in his body. This power was not very powerful, but it was unimaginably pure. It was even 100 times purer than Luo Fan's Fa Li. If that was all, Luo Fan could use 1,000 times more Fa Li to get rid of it and instantly recover the damage in his body. However, other than being unimaginably pure, this power also carried an extremely noble aura of law. This aura of law made this power seem like the ruler of all power, like the emperor of all power. It could control and command all power. Luo Fan's Fa Li was condensed from his own body. It could be said to be the power formed from the world inside his body. It was completely different from the power of the outside world. As a result, he was not greatly affected by this aura of law. As a result, he was still able to kill and expel this power under the aura of law. However, since the effect was not great, it meant that there was still an effect. This effect caused his speed of killing and expelling this power to become extremely slow. Therefore, it was only until the void returned to normal and the existence slowed down that he completely eliminated the influence of the power and allowed the damage in his body to recover. As for why he needed to repair the damage and expel the power, it was needless to say. In a battle of this level, leaving the opponent's power in one's body, no matter how little, was equivalent to courting death. If he did not eliminate it, there was no need to continue the battle. He could just admit defeat. Luo Fan came back to his senses and did not bother to say anything else. With a thought, the power of the Void Wuji Palace seeped out of his body and turned into a robe that covered his body. After Luo Fan's previous refinement, the Void Wuji Palace did not only completely break away from the primitive universe like Luo Fan, it also broke through the primordial unity realm and became a Grand Luo, turning into a Grand Luo heavenly treasure. The requirement to become a Grand Luo was to reach the realm of great perfection. Therefore, the power of the Void Wuji Palace, which could become a Grand Luo heavenly treasure, was naturally not limited to being a Grotto Heaven treasure. After its power went through various transformations, it turned into a defensive power. So what? The power of the void Wuji Palace enveloped Luo Fan, causing Luo Fan to emit an independent, self-sufficient, and otherworldly aura. After the robe was formed, Luo Fan did not hesitate at all. He lifted his foot and stomped on the void. Under his stomp, the void seemed to turn solid. Countless tiny cracks appeared and spread in all directions. However, these cracks were, after all, created by a casual stomp. They were far from the cracks that could turn the void into fragments. Therefore, in an instant, they were repaired by the various rules and laws of the primitive universe. In the blink of an eye, the void had returned to normal. After stomping on the void, Luo Fan's body shook. Like a ray of light, he crossed the void and appeared in front of the giant. He rubbed his hands, and the magical power in his body was released from his hands. It turned into boundless thunderbolts and blasted at the giant's head. This thunderbolt was different from all the thunderbolts that existed in the primitive universe. Instead, it was somewhat similar to the Du Tian chaotic divine thunder. However, it had an incomparably strong will. That was Luo Fan's will. Under this will, the Du Tian chaotic divine thunder could isolate all external wills and the influence of external laws. It could concentrate all its power so that it could be infused into the target it wanted to attack. As soon as this thunderbolt appeared, all the star essence chi, innate essence chi, and chaotic essence chi within a radius of 10 million miles were instantly isolated. An energy vacuum area within a radius of 10 million miles instantly appeared around them. Even the rules, laws, and the supreme great Tao that determined all rules and laws seemed to retreat or fall silent to avoid this thunderbolt. Such a powerful, terrifying, and inconceivable thunderbolt directly bombarded the head of that existence at an unimaginable speed. The further away from Luo Fan's body, the more dazzling the thunderbolt became, and the more powerful the aura it emitted became. By the time it arrived in front of the giant, the thunderbolt had already covered the sky and earth. It was as terrifying as if it could turn the entire primitive universe back into primordial chaos. The giant's cultivation realm was even higher than Luo Fan's. Although the problem it had to solve was 100 times more serious than Luo Fan's, its reaction speed was not inferior to Luo Fan's. When the thunderbolt appeared, it had already reacted. Its 8 arms spun at the speed of light and condensed into a strange shape in the void. It was a mysterious shape that seemed to condense all of heaven and earth, all the great Tao, all the rules, and all the great Tao. After this shape appeared, the seal that had floated above its head suddenly sank down, and a strange power that Luo Fan had never imagined or seen appear between its 8 arms at the same time. This power possessed a certain nature of chaos, a certain nature of wind, and even a certain wondrous nature of fire. Wind and fire seemed to produce an endless reaction between this power, giving rise to countless strange changes, as if it could split the heavens and earth apart in the chaos. The moment this power appeared, it rushed down. The moment the seal sank in front of it, it fused with the seal, causing the seal's aura to skyrocket by 10,000 times. Its color turned a strange dark gold, and any ripples it gave off caused the space and time around the seal to ripple, as if they were about to be thrown into disorder and destroyed by the ripples. Without a single sound, the thunderbolt that Luo Fan condensed that resembled the prime chaos divine thunder had already collided with the seal. The seal appeared material, but it was in fact just a force. Therefore, while it seemed like the thunderbolt and the seal collided, it was in fact just 2 forces colliding. The collision of the 2 forces, however, produced an incredibly wondrous annihilation effect. The 2 forces, time, space, matter, and energy, all completely disappeared under this annihilation effect. An increasingly large black hole continued to expand from the point where the 2 forces collided, instantly enveloping that existence. Then, it also enveloped Luo Fan, who was not far away. It expanded to a diameter of millions of miles before stopping. If the black hole was just an ordinary dimensional hole, it would have shrunk under the effects of the rules, principles, and supreme great Tao before vanishing completely. However, it was clear that the black hole was not an ordinary dimensional hole. The power of a grand heavenly could not be eliminated so easily. At this moment, the annihilation effect did not disappear in the dimensional hole. It continued at every moment, completely wiping out any signs of recovery, making the black hole seem like it could exist forever. The change seemed crude, but in reality, it contained boundless profundities and the mysteries of a grand heavenly. The annihilation effect could even annihilate time and space, but it was not fatal to that entity in Luo Fan. There is no need to mention Luo Fan. At this moment, the robe he was wearing was formed by the power of the limitless Void Palace. Wearing this robe was equivalent to being inside the limitless Void Palace. Naturally, the effect of annihilation couldn't affect him, but only the power of the limitless Void Palace. On the other hand, the power of the infinite Void Palace was endless. A little bit of annihilation would be born, and it was enough to support Luo Fan's survival in the dimensional hole forever. Even when the power disappeared, Luo Fan could still use his own power to protect himself. The effect would not be any worse than using the infinite Void Palace to protect himself. Therefore, the annihilation effect of the dimensional hole did not pose any threat to Luo Fan at all. That entity could cross the endless chaotic state of the Julie Great World to come to the primordial world. How could the annihilation effect of the dimensional hole compare to the chaotic state? Naturally, it would not affect him at all. Even if he did not rely on his own power to travel through the chaotic state, it would not change the fact that he could travel through the chaotic state. In this way, no matter what methods you use to command the world, it will no longer have any effect, Luo Fan said calmly when he saw the change. Chapter 698. The location affected by the annihilation effect was a void that seemed to have a radius of tens of millions of kilometers in the outside world, but it seemed boundless inside, with no end in sight. Text first. The reason why it seemed boundless and endless was because this area was void. Time and space did not even exist inside, so naturally, there was no such thing as area or volume. Even the annihilation effect that caused this area could not cause any damage to that existence and Luo Fan. So naturally, this nothingness would not cause any damage to these two powerful existences. However, although they were not injured, the existence of this location still had an extremely huge impact on the two of them. This was because time and space did not exist here, so naturally, there were no rules or laws. Even the supreme great Tao could not cover this place like the outside world. Therefore, it could be said that this place had already broken away from the primordial world and become a mysterious place that did not belong to the primordial world, nor did it exist in the state of chaos. There was no time or space in this void. The way Luo Fan and the existence existed was completely different from the way they existed in the void outside. There was no front, back, left, or right, nor was there any distance between them. They could only rely on their own thoughts to sense that the other party was also in this void. Moreover, the distance between them was not determined objectively by the outside world. Instead, it was determined by the will that they possessed. This nature was extremely different from objective facts. Instead, it was closer to an idealistic state. Perhaps this was another form of extreme, yin giving birth to yang, and extreme yang giving birth to yin. This state was exactly what Luo Fan wanted to create with his previous actions. It was a weakening of the existence's greatest advantage that he felt was the most beneficial. Through the previous battles, the greatest feeling that the existence gave Luo Fan was that he possessed some kind of extremely incredible law power. This kind of power of law was almost like cheating. After entering the untainted land for a short while, he became more familiar with the supreme great way of the untainted land than Luo Fan, who had stayed in the untainted land for trillions of years. He was actually able to control the rules and laws of the untainted land more freely than Luo Fan, and exert a power that was thousands of times more powerful than Luo Fan. He was naturally extremely tempted by the power of the decree. If it was anyone else that utilized this power, then he would definitely think of a way to probe and study this power in hopes of being able to fully grasp the power of this decree at a certain moment. However, at this moment, the person who had grasped this power was an existence who was countless times more powerful than him. If he had such a thought at this moment, then what awaited him would be death. Since he couldn't deal with the power of the law, then the only thing he could do was to make it so that no power around that existence could be controlled by the power of the law and weaken the power of the law as much as possible. That was why such a situation had occurred. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the existence smiled and said, "You're very smart to be able to think of a way to deal with my power of law so quickly. Your talent is even better than I had expected. I have a cultivation technique that can help me pass the tribulation of heaven and earth to become a sage. Your talent is so outstanding. If you worship me as your master, I can teach you a cultivation technique so that you can also use this world to pass the tribulation of heaven and earth to become a sage. What do you think?" The existence's words entered Luo Fan's ears through a mysterious channel, causing Luo Fan's heart to tremble, and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. Is there such a thing as using the opportunity to pass the tribulation of heaven and earth to become a sage? This was the only thought that kept flashing in his mind. The existence had said those words lightly and contained a lot of information, but there was not a single word about cultivation. At most, it could be regarded as an idea or a concept. However, to Luo Fan, these words were tantamount to opening a door to the sky in front of him, allowing him to see an incomparably magnificent world that he had never imagined. After that thought flashed and magnified in his mind, countless pieces of information rushed out from the depths of Luo Fan's memory, drowning his mind in an instant, causing an endless stream of information to pour out from his eyes. Endless flashes of wisdom constantly flickered between these information flows. In the blink of an eye, he felt as if he had faintly broken through a mysterious barrier, as if he could faintly touch a realm that he could not touch no matter how hard he tried before. That realm was not the Daluo Loose Dao, but something above it. It belonged to the second realm of the Daluo True Dao. I see. Ha ha, I understand. Luo Fan suddenly burst into laughter. Indescribable joy instantly drowned him. The existence's words made him faintly touch the realm of the Daluo True Dao. Normally, this would be enough to make him unable to restrain his joy, but at this moment, this was not what he was happy about. On the contrary, he did not pay any attention to the realm that he had faintly touched the realm of the Daluo True Dao. At this moment, all his attention was placed on the door to the sky that had suddenly opened in front of him. When a world goes through the great tribulation of a world, apart from suffering an unimaginable test, a slight carelessness might cause the world to be destroyed and disappear into the chaos. However, if the world passes through the great tribulation of the world, it will definitely be able to obtain incredible benefits, allowing the world to take a huge step forward. From this change, it can be seen that when the world goes through the great tribulation of the world, there will naturally be some incredible and mysterious existence that will be poured into the world, allowing the world to obtain benefits. If I can seize this mysterious existence when the world goes through the great tribulation of the world, then my cultivation will improve greatly. It might be a little exaggerated to say that I have become a sage, but if I do it a few more times, I'm afraid that I will become a sage naturally. This thought lingered in Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, he recalled the two great tribulations of the world that he had experienced in the untainted land, and he could faintly sense the traces left behind by that mysterious existence. The first great tribulation of the world was the tribulation of the extraterrestrial demons. During that process, the endless extraterrestrial demons merged into the untainted land, and if one was not careful, the nature of the entire untainted land would change, turning it into a boundless demon domain. That change was a change in the essence of the untainted land, and it was not much different from its destruction. The result of the great tribulation of the world in 2000 was that the boundless extraterrestrial demons merged with the untainted land and were transformed into one. 296 billion grotto heaven worlds. The endless extraterrestrial demons were reborn in the untainted land and turned into countless different types of beasts. Instead, they were assimilated by the untainted land, causing the untainted land to become many times more stable and the species of living beings there to become many times more abundant, greatly increasing the potential of the untainted land. Previously, Luo Fan did not sense anything special about this change. He only felt that this development was extremely natural, as if the entire great tribulation of the world was for this final goal, to bring endless benefits to the untainted land. However, at that moment, after hearing what that existence said, he realized that there was a mysterious existence controlling everything in the entire development process of the great tribulation of the world. It was that mysterious existence that allowed him to sense the arrival of the great tribulation of the world tens of thousands of years before it happened. It was also that existence that made the innate gods of the untainted land follow Luo Fan so obediently for so many years. It was also that existence that had discovered the method by which the extraterrestrial demons had descended. Almost every step of the Great Tribulation had been played by that existence. Although that effect could lead things into the abyss at any time, it could also develop to the most glorious state. The second Great Tribulation of the world was this one. It was the tribulation of stars falling. In this tribulation, Buzhou Mountain collapsed. The endless starry sky was destroyed, the 18 layers of hell were destroyed, countless stars fell, and billions of living beings died. Almost every change could lead to the most serious consequences. The entire untainted land was completely destroyed and merged into the state of chaos. It completely disappeared and no longer existed. Although Luo Fan had used various methods to twist the Great Tribulation into the best possible outcome, the consequences of the Great Tribulation had not completely disappeared. The entire untainted land was still affected by the aftermath of the Great Tribulation. It was easy to imagine how terrifying such a Great Tribulation was. It was such a Great Tribulation that seemed to be under Luo Fan's control. It was Luo Fan's indulgence, and it was Luo Fan's final effort to turn the tide that allowed the Great Tribulation to end so perfectly. However, in reality, there was still some kind of existence that was controlling the Great Tribulation. It was that existence that gave Lei Jiuxiao and Luo Fu the idea of fighting for the position of the protagonist of the world. It was that existence that made the battle become more and more intense as time passed. In the end, it shattered the starry sky and caused the stars to fall, causing irreversible consequences. Luo Fan's response was also vaguely influenced by that existence. He ordered Hong Jun to collect Grotto Heaven Worlds and indulge the battle between Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. He allowed the battle between the human clan and the demon clan to turn from gentle to intense, and in the end, it could not be stopped. Even the way the stars fell and the way the 18 layers of hell surged into the untainted land were vaguely controlled by some kind of mysterious existence. They vaguely followed a certain pattern. If Luo Fan had not completely broken free from the control of the untainted land and become independent, he would definitely not have been able to discover the faint pattern even if he had heard the four-faced, eight-armed existence's words. However, this kind of if did not happen. When Luo Fan existed independently of the untainted land and truly became self-sufficient, he would definitely be able to find even the slightest trace of the outside world's influence on him. No matter how subtle or mysterious it was, as long as he wanted to find it, he would definitely be able to find even the slightest trace of it. In the process of the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth, the existence that vaguely controlled all the changes of the Great Tribulation was extremely obscure. It was so obscure that even the four-faced, eight-armed existence felt that if he did not become a saint and did not rely on his body, he would definitely not be able to sense it at all. However, when such an obscure existence completely existed independently of the untainted land, it could not surpass his senses. He still found the traces left on his body. For Luo Fan, As long as he found the traces left on his body, it would be extremely easy for Luo Fan to create a method to use the power of this existence to nourish himself. After all, since Luo Fan stepped onto the path of cultivation and reached the peak of the zenith heaven dispelling Tao, all the methods he cultivated, all the divine abilities he used, and all the methods he used were created by himself. In fact, when he was comprehending the scene of lunatic swordsman's creation of the world, he had completely solidified his foundation and completely comprehended almost all the mysteries that were lower than his cultivation realm. In a situation where he already had this kind of creativity and the foundation of creation, it was naturally easy for him to create a method to use the power of the existence that controlled the Great Tribulation to nourish himself. At this moment, with a slight thought, there was an extremely subtle, extremely mysterious, and extremely complicated method slowly flowing through his mind. When the four-faced, eight-armed existence heard Luo Fan's hearty laughter and sensed the ecstasy in it, he could not help but have a bad feeling. However, no matter how rich his imagination was, how could he have imagined that the words he had just casually mentioned would actually give Luo Fan such a huge harvest? Not only did it allow him to touch the realm of the Daoyuo, true Tao, but it also allowed him to directly sense the mysterious existence that existed during the Great Tribulation of the world, which controlled everything and imposed a test on the world. It was even more exaggerated that he directly created a method to use that existence to nourish himself. The reason why the four-faced, eight-armed being hadn't thought of this was because it was a creature of the Jili Great World. It had been born after the Jili Great World had become a great world. It was a creature that had become a postnatal world, because this was his essence. Therefore, even though his cultivation realm had gone through trillions of years of cultivation, and he had reached the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Way, and in terms of cultivation realm, he was billions of times more profound than Luo Fan, he still could not understand what kind of existence the innate living beings at the beginning of the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth were. Zhong Yu couldn't understand how the innate gods, who didn't have any teacher, could only rely on their own will and psyche to search for even the slightest method to circulate the energy in their bodies. Just what kind of creativity could they possess? Ever since he was born, he had been imparted with an exquisite and indescribable cultivation method by the sages. If he wanted to create any kind of cultivation method, he would need millions of years of research. He would need the support of endless information and endless energy to create a new cultivation method. Moreover, there was no guarantee that this method would not have any fatal flaws, and if one cultivated it, one would not die. As for discovering the mysterious existence that only a saint could detect, that was even more impossible. It was because of this incomprehension that the four-faced, eight-armed existence had so casually revealed that information. Even now, he still could not imagine how great the benefits that information had for Luo Fan. However, he was a supreme existence at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Way after all. Although he could not understand how great the benefits Luo Fan had obtained, he knew that he had done something wrong. The person in front of him had obtained some benefits that he could not understand. He could even vaguely deduce what these benefits were related to. However, Luo Fan was an existence that he could not understand. So even if he deduced some, it was far from the truth. He could not truly deduce what Luo Fan had obtained. However, this was already enough for him to make a decision. At that moment, he could not be bothered to wait for Luo Fan to answer his previous question about taking Luo Fan as a disciple, so that Luo Fan could also obtain opportunities in the Great Tribulation of the Primordial world and become a saint. With a slight thought, he raised his hand and grabbed. Two of the eight arms separated and grabbed towards Luo Fan. This place was a void. There was no time, no space, and all changes were almost idealistic. Therefore, although he was grabbing towards Luo Fan, in reality, he was only using a little bit of force with his hands. He didn't even stretch out his hand. In the Jili Great World, the cultivation realm at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Way was naturally not called the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Way. After all, it was only a realm in Luo Fan's Tao Fruit Great Tao. However, although it was not called that, there was no difference in cultivation realm. It was also an existence that far surpassed the so-called peak of the zenith heaven golden immortal by hundreds of millions of times. After all, even Luo Fan could create the indescribably exquisite method of the Tao fruit, Great Tao. Naturally, the saints of the Jili Great World could also create similar or even more exquisite methods. This existence was the disciple of the saint, so it was natural for him to cultivate the exquisite method created by the saint. Therefore, at this moment, the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms was several times stronger than Luo Fan in terms of cultivation realm. It was as powerful as Luo Fan when he cultivated to the peak of the zenith heaven golden way. The difference might even be greater. In other words, if this 4-faced and 8-armed existence before him was in a world that he and Luo Fan were equally familiar with, merely by relying on its own aura, it would be able to crush Luo Fan into powder with just a slight fluctuation, annihilate his soul, and crush his life brand, causing Luo Fan to perish directly and his soul to disperse. Of course, the premise was that the two of them were in a world that they were familiar with. Just like in the untainted world before, although the existence had a cultivation realm that was hundreds of millions of times higher than Luo Fan, he could only use the power of his law to command the untainted world to block Luo Fan's attack. He could not form an absolute crushing force against him. At this moment, in this nothingness, 9b, meal, Xiao Rushu, BR/ hashtag chapter 738, indescribable surprise chapter 738, indescribable surprise. Chapter 699. In the void where there was no time or space, only the supreme existences of the saint level could not be affected in the slightest and completely display their infinite magical powers and supreme power. Other than the existence of the sage level, other cultivators, even if they were at the peak of the golden path of the Daluo and were one step away from becoming a sage, could not move freely in the void, let alone unleash much of their power. After all, as long as they did not become a sage, they could not truly leave the world and exist. They could not truly transcend the world. Under such circumstances, their strength was dependent on the heavens and earth. In other words, as long as they did not become a sage, their true power lay in their ability to borrow and control the world outside. It was their ability to control the world outside that determined how powerful they could be. Because of this, although the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms had reached the peak of the golden path of the Daluo, which was a realm that was billions of times more powerful than Luo Fan in the starry sky, he could only spend a lot of time familiarizing himself with the chaos world, the rules, the laws, and the supreme great Tao. Only then could he use the power of his decree to defend against Luo Fan's attack. Therefore, in this void without time and space, the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms still had the advantage of the cultivation realm over Luo Fan. However, the power that this cultivation realm could unleash was billions of times weaker than in the outside world. This was already at a level that Luo Fan could barely deal with. There was no time and space in this place. Luo Fan and the existence did not become a sage, so they naturally needed time and space to survive. What method did the existence use to construct a time and space around him for him to survive? Putting aside the existence, Luo Fan relied on the supreme power of the Palace of the Infinite Void to transform into a long robe and draped over his body. This long robe was transformed from the power of the Palace of the Infinite Void. Naturally, it made him feel like he was in the Palace of the Infinite Void. If it was in the normal chaos world, this power could only make Luo Fan stay under the protection of the Palace of the Infinite Void and not have any other effects. However, in this void where there was no time and no space, this power displayed incredible might. That power made Luo Fan's time faster than the primordial world by more than 40 million times. Therefore, when the 4-faced, 8-armed being sensed Luo Fan's joy and began to act, when Luo Fan sensed the being's 2 arms grabbing towards him from nothingness, several decades had passed in Luo Fan's mind. And when he sensed that arm grabbing onto it and entering the space-time of the everlasting palace, another few decades passed. This change was so obvious that the flow of time between that existence and Luo Fan space-time was very different. This was to be expected. Among the countless worlds in the boundless state of chaos, apart from Luo Fan, who came from Earth and had already tasted the pain of not having enough time, who else would have such a strong obsession with time? For the living beings in the chaos, time was meaningless to them. As long as they did not die in the Great Tribulation, billions of years were just like taking a nap to them. They even hated that time passed too slowly. They wished that millions of years would pass as soon as they closed their eyes. How could they complain that time was not enough? How could they be like Luo Fan, who wished that 1 second was equivalent to billions of years? Even if some living beings wanted to surpass their peers and gain more time to compete with their peers, they would at most find a way to accelerate time to a few hundred times the normal speed. How could they be like Luo Fan, who accelerated time to more than 40 million times the normal speed? To them, such a method was simply unimaginable, just like the four-faced, eight-armed being at this moment. The moment his hands invaded the space-time of Luo Fan's body, he sensed that the flow of time in the space-time of Luo Fan's body had reached an incredible speed. In an instant, his 12 eyes were filled with disbelief, and there was only one word in his mind: lunatic. Since the four-faced, eight-armed being was born, he had lived in the Julie world for trillions of years. He had seen all kinds of things in the human world and seen countless strange living beings. However, in his billions of years of life, he had never seen a living being like this lunatic in front of him, who would actually speed up his own time to the point where it was tens of millions of times faster than the outside world, because he was worried that he did not have enough time. To some living beings who did not have the heart to live forever, immortality was a kind of torture. To living beings who had the heart to live forever and the will to live forever, it was a supreme enjoyment. Generally speaking, living beings who could cultivate immortality had the heart to live forever and the will to live forever. However, the heart to live forever and the will to live forever were also divided into strong and weak ones, according to what the four-faced, eight-armed being had seen and heard in the past trillions of years. It was also based on the experience that the Julie world had accumulated over billions of Yuanhui. Apart from the living beings at the beginning of the world, most of the post-celestial living beings' hearts to live forever and the will to live forever could not last more than 1,000 Yuanhui. In other words, once an ordinary post-celestial living being had lived for more than 296 billion years, they would become tired of living and treat immortality as an unbearable torture, so they would choose to commit suicide and seek death. Even the Khanate gods who had existed at the beginning of the world rarely had the heart to live forever and the will to live forever for more than 100,000 Yuanhui. By the same logic, even Khanate gods who had lived for more than 129.6 billion years would gradually feel that immortality was a kind of pain, a kind of torture, and they would become crazy or seek death. This theory of immortality had already become common knowledge in the Julie world. All the events that had happened in the Julie world for billions of Yuanhui proved that this theory was correct. In the Julie world, apart from the sages who had existed since the beginning of the Julie world, there were no other Khanate gods who had survived until now. The reason for this, apart from the fact that most Khanate gods had died in various tribulations, was consistent with the theory of immortality. The four-faced, eight-armed being had been accepted as a disciple by the sages and had stood out among countless cultivators. Apart from his outstanding aptitude, as a post-celestial living being, his heart to live forever and the will to live forever were still as strong as before after he had lived for 100,000 Yuanhui. This was the most important reason. However, even if his heart to live forever and the will to live forever were so strong, he could not be sure that he could maintain it before the opportunity to become a sage came. He still wished that time would pass faster so that the opportunity to become a sage would arrive. Under such circumstances, if he didn't try his best to slow down the time in his body so that 1 second was equivalent to thousands of seconds in the outside world, he would already be considered to have a firm will. How could he accelerate his own time like Luo Fan? It was precisely because of this that he felt that Luo Fan was a madman, a stupid existence that he could not understand. At this moment, the four-faced, eight-armed being suddenly regretted fighting with such a madman. If I had known that he was such a madman, I would have avoided him. When he loses his heart to live forever, he will naturally die. Why would I need to take the risk to attack him? This thought reverberated in the being's mind. Naturally, Luo Fan did not know that in the being's eyes, he was already a madman. He did not know about the theory of immortality at all. Moreover, even if he knew, his actions would not change because of the existence of the theory. This was not because his heart to live forever was as firm and unshakable as a sage. It was because of his cultivation, his obsession, and his Tao heart. It was to break 1 second into countless seconds. At this moment, the flow of time that was tens of millions of times faster than the outside world was already extremely terrifying, but if there was a chance to increase this speed, he would not reject it, nor would he hesitate at all. In the decades when he sensed the giant's 2 arms grabbing towards him, he had already analyzed the 2 arms hundreds of millions of times. He had also experimented with countless ways to deal with it. When the 2 arms really broke through the space-time and grabbed toward him, he had already thought through all the problems clearly. Without any hesitation, his hands drew 2 indescribable trajectories and slowly moved towards the 2 arms. Although the 2 arms had already broken through the space-time of the Wuji Palace, their bodies were in a completely different space-time from the Wuji Palace after all. Even if they could break through the space-time and attack Luo Fan, the frequency of their attacks would definitely not be able to catch up with the flow of time in the Wuji Palace. Therefore, although Luo Fan moved slowly, he easily met the 2 arms before the power of the 2 arms reached its peak. Although Luo Fan's 2 arms seemed to be just an action, it contained all the understanding that Luo Fan had gained after touching the Zenith Heaven Truth Realm. It could be said that it was the crystallization of all the cultivation achievements in his life. Every time he moved, every time his muscles vibrated, every time his magic power flowed, and every movement he made contained all the principles he had comprehended, pushing his offensive path to an indescribable pinnacle. If this action appeared in the untainted world, then every muscle vibration, every movement, and every flow of Dharma power would probably cause a violent change in the void within a radius of millions of miles. It could be the destruction of the void, the creation of the void, the destruction of life, or the birth of all living things, even though this was not the untainted world, but a void without time and space. This action naturally caused an incredible change. It was as if the great Tao had flowed through. In an instant, there were billions of worlds around his hands. His hands had been born out of thin air and destroyed out of thin air. The birth and destruction of these worlds were different from the birth and destruction of the worlds that he had used in the past. Instead, it was like the birth and destruction of the untainted world. At first, there was a strange figure that looked like Luo Fan in the void. Then, the existence raised his hand and released a strange power. This power kept evolving and finally turned into a world. The strange figure also integrated into the world, making the world full of life and extremely prosperous. After that, the world developed at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, it declined from its peak. The entire world gradually collapsed, and, in the end, it turned into the figure. Then, the figure created the world again and transformed into all living things. The world developed and was destroyed again. Just like that, the reincarnation of countless worlds was formed, and it displayed endless, unimaginable profoundness. If the process of the birth and destruction of any of these worlds was seen by any living beings in the untainted world, just one of the scenes would probably be like the moment when Luo Fan obtained the scene of the sword lunatics splitting the world apart. They would be able to obtain endless mysteries of the great Tao from it, and they might even be able to rely on it to become a zenith heaven. Unfortunately, at this moment, Even the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms could not see this, let alone the living beings in the untainted world. Immediately, Luo Fan's hands collided with the 2 arms. At the moment of collision, Luo Fan's hands trembled subtly. In an instant, the scenes of the birth and destruction of the worlds that had appeared around his hands suddenly unified. Countless figures that looked like Luo Fan appeared. Each of them released the power of creation, which gathered into one and blasted towards the 2 arms of the existence, with 4 faces and 8 arms. When Luo Fan's hands came into contact with the 2 arms, they directly blasted the 2 arms. The existence with 4 faces and 8 arms had reached the peak of the zenith heaven metal path. The profoundness contained in its body was not something that Luo Fan could understand at the moment. Originally, Luo Fan would not be able to dodge this grab no matter what. However, before this grab, Luo Fan had several decades to observe and comprehend the profoundness of this grab. The response he had made was naturally the most suitable to block this grab. The moment the power collided with the 2 arms trembled and turned into billions of worlds. The arms that were like piles of sand were blasted into countless grains of sand. They lost the shape of the arms and turned into a fine sand mist. In the sand mist, every grain of sand that was as small as a speck of dust was a complete world. There were billions of living beings in that world. Every living being in them was praying and praising at all times. Boundless wills were gathering in these worlds, finally intertwining and forming the shape of the arm. This vast and limitless will was incomparably pure. Although it was condensed from the prayers and praises of billions of living beings, it did not have the slightest trace of impurity. It was so pure that even Luo Fan's magic power could not compare. It was this vast and boundless will that gathered the endless worlds into one place, forming 2 arms. It could be said that the power contained in the 2 arms was the power of the endless worlds. The terrifying power alone was enough to easily crush Luo Fan. What's more, this power was controlled by the boundless will, which made its might even more terrifying. If Luo Fan was grabbed by it, not only would his body be unable to resist the power condensed from the boundless world, but it would also be eroded by the boundless will. Although it was impossible for him to completely lose himself, he would no longer be able to control his body, let alone escape from the grasp of those 2 hands. However, at this moment, after Luo Fan's hands made that movement, the vast will that gathered the countless worlds into the 2 arms was eroded by the strange power that supported the birth and death of countless worlds that shot out from the countless figures around Luo Fan's hands. It was no longer pure and no longer condensed. Naturally, it lost the power that gathered the endless worlds into the arms. As a result, the 2 arms were directly blasted apart, and the countless worlds collapsed and turned into a sand-like existence. Luo Fan had already expected this situation, and his hands shook slightly. In an instant, an indescribable destructive power appeared out of thin air and shrouded the sand-like mist. If the sand-like endless worlds condensed into arms, the power of each world would naturally be connected and circulated endlessly. Even the largest number would not be able to describe the number of the wills of the endless living beings in one place, and it would naturally be able to erupt with supreme power that could easily crush existences in the Zenith Heaven Truth Path or even the Zenith Heaven Golden Path. However, at this moment, the worlds had already collapsed and separated, and the wills that connected the worlds were no longer pure. How could they still unite all the power? Naturally, they could no longer form an effective barrier against the attacks from the outside world. Therefore, under the destructive power that Luo Fan's hands had generated out of thin air, the world collapsed piece by piece. The number of creatures that could not even be described with the largest number turned into nothingness along with the collapse of the world in the process. As the living beings died and turned into nothingness, the wills that connected the worlds became even more powerless to resist the external power, and the speed at which the world's collapse continued to increase like a rolling snowball. In just a short while, only half of the sand-like mist was left. In other words, the four-faced and eight-armed existence had lost 1/8 of its arms in a short while. It must be known that turning the arms into an existence that was formed by the accumulation of the countless worlds would certainly increase the power of the two arms to an unimaginable degree. However, if such arms could be easily formed and recovered after being lost, Luo Fan would not believe it no matter what. How could the four-faced and eight-armed existence not feel the loss of its arms? Chapter 700. A sure suspicion this voice contained indescribable anger, as well as an intense sense of disbelief. An existence at the peak of the Daluo Golden Path had actually suffered such a serious injury while attacking a Daluo scattered path. For this four-faced, eight-armed existence, this simply subverted his values. How could he not feel angry at being insulted and feel an indescribable sense of disbelief? Luo Fan sensed the strong emotions contained in the voice. However, Luo Fan didn't care about it all. The destructive power he unleashed didn't stop at all. Instead, it became even more intense as it strangled the sand mist formed by the countless worlds. This caused the destruction of the endless worlds to become faster and faster, causing the extinction of the living beings within them to become more and more complete. This made the four-faced, eight-armed existence even more furious. However, even though he was furious, the existence with four faces and eight arms had reached the pinnacle of the Golden Path after all, so his control over his emotions had reached an unimaginable level. In just a short while, he had already calmed down and made a response. His other two arms grabbed at the space-time where Luo Fan was located in a completely different way from the previous two. The might of an existence at the peak of the Golden Tao had long since attained an unimaginable realm. Even though there was a world of difference between them and the Saint Realm, compared to other existences below this realm, they weren't too different from omnipotent. Therefore, changing the flow of time at his current location was not difficult for him at all. However, he did not have Luo Fan's obsession with time. Moreover, he was well aware of the Julie Great World's theory of longevity. Therefore, he had never used this method of speeding up the flow of time on himself. However, at this moment, if he did not change the flow of time that he was in and did not make the space-time that he was in become the same as the space-time that Luo Fan was in, what awaited him would be the two arms being completely destroyed by Luo Fan. The countless years of effort that he had spent on the two arms would go up in smoke. Under such circumstances, he had no choice but to unwillingly alter the flow of time around him, trying his best to approach the flow of time around Luo Fan. Unfortunately, he was still too slow. To him, it was not impossible to accelerate the space-time he was in to tens of millions of times that of the outside world. However, that did not mean that he could accelerate the space-time he was in to that level at any time. Those at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Metal Path were almost omnipotent, but they were not saints after all, so they were not truly omnipotent. He wanted to accelerate time to the same speed as Luo Fan, so that his movements could keep up with Luo Fan was naturally not difficult, but it required a process. 100,000 times was the limit of what he could do in a short period of time. If he wanted to speed it up further, then even with his cultivation at the peak of the Golden Path, it would require him to exhaust a few years of time. Moreover, he would require various other conditions in order to accomplish it. Damn it, this person was definitely a lunatic. If he's not a lunatic, how could he accelerate the time he's in to such a level? He's practically courting death. After this existence reached the limit of what he could accelerate, this was the only thought in his mind, expressing his anger and helplessness. Instantly accelerating the flow of time to 100,000 times was a powerful technique that was almost impossible in the eyes of any living being in the primordial world, even in the eyes of Luo Fan. However, at this moment, it was still hundreds of times slower than the time that Luo Fan was in. Under this difference in the flow of time that was hundreds of times faster, when the existence's two arms broke through the space-time that Luo Fan was in, his original two arms had already become too faintly discernible, illusory, and real. They did not seem to have any substance but they also seemed to be the strongest and most unbreakable strange shadows in the boundless universe and the boundless world. The two strange shadows were in the shape of arms. They were faintly discernible, and they slowly moved in the space-time that Luo Fan was in. Every time they moved, they drew an unimaginably mysterious trajectory, as if they were trying hard to condense something. Although it was only two arm shadows, they seemed to be countless times weaker than the previous two arms. However, the destructive power that Luo Fan triggered, which could strangle the boundless world, had no effect on them at all. The destructive power continued to attack, strangle, and twist, but it did not damage the two arm shadows in the slightest. It was as if the two illusory arms were really just illusory images, completely unaffected by any external forces. Seeing this, Luo Fan finally sighed inwardly. He raised his hand and turned it. Two mysterious black holes appeared out of thin air. They turned into two palms and went towards the two arm shadows. The two black holes were dark. There was time and space in them. However, the composition of time and space was incomparably marvelous and profound. It was constructed in a way that even Luo Fan was only aware of, but didn't know why. This construction method made the two black holes actually become two doors that led to an unknown place. The power of these two gates was extremely mysterious. Although the two-armed phantoms were unable to shake the destructive power that Luo Fan had unleashed, they were unable to resist the two gates in the slightest. They were directly swallowed by the two gates and disappeared into the black hole, arriving at the place that the gates were connected to. At this moment, the entire untainted land shook violently. The shaking was so mysterious and incredible. It was as if the entire untainted land had suddenly returned to the most chaotic time of the Great Tribulation of the world. All kinds of incredible changes happened in an instant. All kinds of incredible changes appeared again. The entire starry sky of the untainted land and the netherworld in the deepest part of the starry sky began to evolve wonderfully again. The endless essence of the stars in the starry sky seemed to have accelerated. They condensed and grew at an unimaginable speed. The heavenly cycle, star formation in the starry sky, seemed to have accelerated by millions of times in that instant. In the deepest part of the netherworld below, the mysterious wheel that existed in the core instantly sped up by thousands of times. However, this speed did not cause too much pressure to the entire netherworld. Instead, it was as if the time in the entire netherworld had accelerated by thousands of times. Although the speed at which the wheel absorbed the spiritual chi of the netherworld increased by thousands of times, everything seemed so natural. It was so natural that the living beings in the netherworld did not feel even the slightest abnormality. At this moment, the four-faced, eight-armed being suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar of fury. In addition to the boundless anger and disbelief from before, the roar also contained an extremely deep fear, a fear that his life was threatened, a fear that he could die at any time. In the past hundreds of millions of years, he would only feel such fear when he faced his master, a saint. He even thought that only saint-level existences could make him feel fear in this boundless state of chaos. However, at this moment, when he faced Luo Fan, who was like an ant to him, an existence that he could normally kill with just a slight fluctuation of his aura, he actually felt such a strong fear. This made him even more panicked, and he was even more in disbelief. That's impossible. How can my two arms be completely erased by such an ant? How is this possible? Could it be that there is something on this ant that can threaten my existence? At this moment, this was the only thought in the four-faced, eight-armed existence's mind. As this thought appeared, his two arms, which had gradually broken into the space-time where Luo Fan was and were about to attack Luo Fan, involuntarily withdrew. Driven by the fear in his heart, he dared not attack Luo Fan again. As a postnatal living being, this four-faced, eight-armed being had the heart of immortality and the will of immortality, which surpassed most of the innate gods. This meant that he had more potential than most of the innate gods and had a greater chance of becoming a sage. But at the same time, it also meant that he was more afraid of death than most of the innate gods. The heart of longevity and the will of longevity were the heart and the will to survive. The stronger this kind of heart and the stronger this kind of will, the more care he had for life and the more he was afraid of death. The reason why he was able to survive in the prosperous Jili Big World for 100,000 yuan Wei before he was accepted as a disciple of Sage was that he had many life-saving divine senses, and his caution was the most important factor. At this moment, Luo Fan was able to completely erase the existence of his two arms with a method that he could not understand, making it seem as if he had never had these two arms, and that he had lived for countless years with 4 faces and 6 arms instead of 4 faces and 8 arms. This was enough to threaten his life. So how could he not be horrified and treat Luo Fan cautiously? Therefore, it was reasonable for him to suddenly retreat. Although Luo Fan was a little surprised by this 4-faced, 8-armed existence's reaction, he did not find it difficult to understand. Luo Fan's heart of longevity and will of longevity were also extremely astonishing, so he could naturally clearly understand the mentality of that existence. In fact, he even felt that if he encountered what that existence had encountered, his reaction might not be much better than that existence's. Fortunately, I comprehended something just now, or would be really troublesome this time. Luo Fan had already relaxed a little at this moment, and such a thought flashed through his mind. Previously, the 2 illusory arms that he had left behind after killing the infinitely tiny worlds were none other than the origin of the existence of the 2 arms, as well as the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms. Over the years, the 2 arms have been the manifestation of its strong will. It could be said that as long as the 2 illusory figures existed, no matter how many times the 2 arms were killed, the flesh and blood on them, and the worlds on them were completely wiped out, the 2 arms would definitely be able to recover. In fact, it would not take long for them to recover. However, as long as the 2 illusory figures were erased, even if the 2 arms were not damaged at all to that existence, it would be equivalent to losing the 2 arms. In other words, as long as the 2 illusory figures were erased, even if the 2 arms were complete, it would be equivalent to the 2 arms of an ordinary person being chopped off. They would become 2 dead objects and would no longer belong to that existence. It was precisely because the 2 illusory figures were so important that the difficulty of erasing the 2 illusory figures was definitely not the same as erasing the real bodies of the 2 arms. After all, if one wanted to erase the real bodies of the 2 arms, one would only need great power that surpassed the 2 arms. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to make that existence admit that the 2 arms that it had possessed for trillions of years were not its own and did not exist. Luo Fan was currently at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Scattered Path, and he could be considered to have touched the threshold of the Zenith Heaven True Path. However, compared to the existence at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Path, he was still like an ant. If he wanted to erase the real bodies of the 2 arms, he would need to spend decades of preparation, unleash all of his strength, and barely manage to do it. He should have been helpless against the 2 illusory figures. However, don't forget that before this, he had comprehended the existence of a certain mysterious existence that controlled the great tribulation of heaven and earth through the words of that existence. Through this comprehension, he had even created a method to use that existence to seek benefits for himself. At this moment, the aftermath of the great tribulation of heaven and earth was still lingering in the primordial world. In other words, that mysterious existence was still lingering in the primordial world. This allowed Luo Fan to have a way to use the mysterious method that he had created to borrow the power of that mysterious existence. The 2 black hole-like doors that he had released with a raise of his hand were constructed by the power of that mysterious existence. Unfortunately, his cultivation had only barely touched the realm of the Daoyuo, Truth Tao. There was still a long way to go before he could completely control the mysterious existence of the Sage realm. Therefore, although the 2 black holes were constructed by him using the power of that mysterious existence, he could not understand the construction method at all. He did not even know where the two black hole-like doors led to, where the two illusory figures were sent to, or what happened after that to cause such a change in the primordial world, let alone comprehend the profoundness of the construction method. This kind of incomprehension and ignorance was just like how he could not understand why the great tribulation of heaven and earth had happened and why the primordial world had so many benefits. After the two black hole-like doors swallowed the two illusory figures, they shook slightly and directly turned into nothingness, as if they had never appeared. After an unknown period of time, it seemed that another few decades had passed. A sigh was heard leisurely. Could it be that saints from other worlds have come to this world in the past few years? I wonder which world it is. Can you tell me? The voice was incomparably calm, as if nothing had happened before. In this void, all communication relied on the mind and will. Since Luo Fan could sense the existence of that living being, he could naturally come into contact with the will of that living being. As a result, there was no interruption of time when they communicated, so there were no obstacles or delays. The existence sent out a thought, and Luo Fan naturally received it. The existence did not feel that the thought that Luo Fan sent out was too fast. When Luo Fan heard the words of the existence, he understood his mentality. It seems that his confidence in himself has already reached the depths of his soul. No matter what, it is impossible to break his confidence. This thought flashed through his mind. From the words of the existence, Luo Fan could easily tell that the existence still thought that he was the strongest person below the saint. No matter what world it was, no matter what living being it was, even if it was an existence of the same realm as him, as long as it was not a saint, it would not be able to hurt it. Since Luo Fan could hurt it at this moment, it meant that there must be a saint-level existence standing behind Luo Fan. Although it was impossible for it to be a saint-level existence who directly attacked, it must be the residual power of that saint-level existence. As for why he did not feel the attack and power of the saint, it was only because the power of the saint-level magical power was not something that a person like him, who had not become a saint, could understand. It was this mentality that made him say those words just now. After that thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, he instantly became even more relaxed. That was because he already understood that the threat that the four-faced and eight-armed existence in front of him posed to him and the primordial world had become extremely small. At the very least, the possibility of it taking the initiative to attack him had become extremely small. Once a person with absolute confidence was convinced of his own opinion, he would never change his opinion because of the words and actions of others. The existence in front of him was obviously such a person with absolute confidence. Therefore, no matter what Luo Fan said next, even if he presented a lot of unquestionable facts to deny that there was a saint from another big world standing behind him, he would never believe it. Instead, he would only think that Luo Fan was lying and that there was an unspeakable conspiracy against him. No matter how irrefutable and perfect the facts were, they would not change his opinion. As long as this opinion existed, the possibility of him taking the initiative to attack Luo Fan would be extremely small. After all, no matter how conceited and confident a person was, as long as he was not a saint, he would definitely not dare to take the initiative to look for a saint-level existence. Chapter 701. Since that was the case, Luo Fan naturally would not stand on ceremony. He immediately said, "If I say it, you definitely won't believe me. In that case, there's no point in saying anything more. Why don't you tell me what your plan is?" Very literary. When the being heard Luo Fan's words, the four faces revealed an expression of "I knew it," as if what Luo Fan had said was completely within his expectations. As expected, it seems that the saint of another world has a great plan. Even at this time, he is still unwilling to reveal even the slightest trace of his plan. However, I am also representing the Nine-League Great World. Back then, my master discovered this world over 100 yuanwees before this world. No matter what, the saints of the other great worlds are all people who came later. If I leave just like this, I naturally don't mind, but it will be a form of harm to my master's dignity. The four-faced eight-armed existence said indifferently. He did not ask Luo Fan where the saint hiding behind him came from, or what his plan was. After all, to him, Luo Fan represented a saint-level existence. He had lived in the Julie world for such a long time, so he knew the dignity of a saint better than Luo Fan. Since the saint's intention was not to reveal anything, if he insisted on asking, it would be a provocation to the saint's dignity. If he angered the saint, he would probably lose his life here. Moreover, Luo Fan's behavior was just as he had guessed. Since he did not mention the existence of the saint in the beginning, he naturally would not mention the existence of the saint now. If Luo Fan had said it directly, he would instead suspect whether Luo Fan was lying to him. As for what he said, he could not leave just like that. That was also reasonable. He had come to the untainted land on the orders of a saint of the Julie world. If he fled without a fight, just because of his speculation, what would be the position of the saint of the Julie world? Luo Fan sensed the being's words. He smiled and said, "Then what do you plan to do?" The being smiled and said, "It's very simple. You just have to return both of my arms. Since you erased those two arms with the help of an external force, you can naturally return them with the help of an external force. When these two arms come back, they will naturally carry the mark of the sage's power. In the future, when we return to Julie, I will have something to explain to my master." When Luo Fan heard this, he shook his head and said, "There is nothing I can do about it. Erasing Sir's two arms has already exhausted all of my abilities. I don't even know how those two arms were erased, so how can I hand them over? Your Excellency, please change your conditions." The existence frowned, but in the blink of an eye, a look of understanding appeared on his face. He had already thought of how low Luo Fan's cultivation realm was. If Luo Fan had his current cultivation realm, he would naturally be able to barely control the power of a sage. At the very least, he would be able to release and retract it. After erasing a certain existence, he would naturally be able to find it. However, with Luo Fan's low cultivation realm, it was already extremely rare for him to be able to touch the power of a sage. Wanting to release and retract, it was simply a dream. Understanding this, the being could not help but reveal a look of helplessness. He had spent an unknown amount of time and energy to refine those two arms. Now that he could no longer use them, how could he not feel helpless? The proposal that he had made previously was naturally to reluctantly explain to his master, but at the same time, it also contained a bit of selfishness, a selfishness to get his two arms back. Now that this selfishness had disappeared, he could only change his method of explaining to his master. That's right, at this moment, all he was thinking about was giving his master an explanation. He was not at the level of a sage. Naturally, he did not rely on his own power to pass through the boundless state of chaos to arrive here. Instead, he relied on a strand of power bestowed by his master, a supreme sage of the Julie world. This power was extremely mysterious. It could protect him and allow him to pass through countless chaotic voids, allowing him to instantly possess the power of a saint-level divine ability. But that was all. Although this power was mysterious, it was only a stream of power after all. Perhaps under normal circumstances, it could be endless and never depleted, but when it was used to do things that only saint-level people could do, this stream of power would be depleted extremely quickly. For example, when passing through the chaotic state of an unknown amount of space, this stream of power had already depleted more than half of its power. If he wanted to return to the Julie world or leave the untainted land, he definitely could not use the remaining half of the power. At the very least, he could not use that power to unleash the power of a sage. At this moment, he was already at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Path. Although he was still far from the sage level, the power of his power had already reached the peak below the sage level. Under these circumstances, if he had no choice but to use the power of a sage, then he would definitely use the power of a sage. Evidently, facing an opponent with a saint-level existence backing him up, he did not have absolute confidence in defeating him without using this power. Since that was the case, his only choice was naturally to retreat. He could only think of how to explain this to his master. He was an invincible existence at the peak of the golden path, golden Tao, so a myriad of thoughts interweaved and flickered within his mind with a flash of thought. In the blink of an eye, he had already thought through everything and understood what he should do. Since that's the case, take another attack from me. If you can withstand this attack, I will turn around and leave without another word. What do you think? The existence said indifferently. This was the best method he could think of to deal with this situation. Even if this method might cause him to lose more of his body, he had no other choice. In order to prove that there was a saint-level existence behind the other party, apart from leaving the mark of the power of a sage at the place where he had injured himself, the best way was to prove that he had already used all his strength, but still could not win. Between these 2 points, the existence that was extremely confident in his strength and thought that he was the strongest person below the sage in the boundless state of chaos. The second method was the one he was most inclined to. Clearly, at this moment, the first method did not work, so he could only choose the second method. When Luo Fan sensed the words of that person, his heart moved, and he inwardly thought, sure enough. His mind was extremely clear, but he did not believe that he could make the other party completely give up and leave the primordial world with just his previous guess. The situation of him receiving the opponent's strongest attack was already the best situation he had expected. Therefore, he immediately said, why not? Do it. The existence understood that it was impossible for Luo Fan to place the battle in the outside world. He could only place the battle in the void that did not even have time and space. How could Luo Fan not understand that he only had a slight chance of victory in this empty environment? Therefore, the two of them did not want to eliminate this area of nothingness and place the battlefield in the outside world. The existence sensed Luo Fan's answer and took a deep breath. Indescribable changes had taken place on all 4 of his faces. His 12 eyes flickered with endless light, and the third eye on each face had a faint purple light flickering in and out. The purple light did not have the noble aura from before. Instead, it was boundless coldness. It was a kind of emotionless aura, and it did not even exist. This kind of coldness was so deep that it reached the depths of the life mark. If ordinary living beings saw this purple light, they would feel as if their entire body had been frozen and completely solidified. One would even feel that under this purple light, even time would be frozen and no longer flow. As long as they felt like this, they would naturally lose the ability to move, and they would even lose their perception of the outside world. It was as if time had really been frozen. The purple light continuously emitted from the existence's 4 third eyes. Every time it emitted, it would become slightly stronger. After billions of emitting and emitting, the light had reached an unbelievable peak. It was almost completely corporeal. It suddenly rushed out, condensed into a purple seal above his head in the blink of an eye. The color of this seal looked the same as the one that had condensed before, but its essence had gone through a tremendous change. Within this seal, there seemed to be countless worlds tangling with each other, fighting, growing, and being destroyed. There were also countless living beings praying and praising it, condensing inconceivable intents that seemed to be extremely pure. The way the countless worlds within the seal was constructed was completely different from the way his 2 arms had been constructed. It seemed even more mysterious, more complicated, and more solid. The entire seal appeared above the head of the being, and a strange ripple spread out from the seal. This fluctuation was so mysterious that it was indescribable. Any existence that encountered this fluctuation, even if it was nothingness, would directly retreat. Even the annihilation power that had created the nothingness that did not exist in this space naturally dissipated after encountering this fluctuation, as if it had never appeared. However, after this annihilation power dissipated, what replaced it was not the starry sky of the great desolate world, but a strange space-time, a strange domain. It was brought about by the imperial seal, brought about by the extremely strong presence of the imperial seal. It reflected the strange space and time that existed within the imperial seal. This space-time was so mysterious that it was indescribable. The scenes within it were constantly changing. It was as if there were billions of worlds being born and destroyed in this space-time at every moment. As the fluctuations spread out, the volume of this space-time continuously increased. Before long, the place where Luo Fan was enveloped by this space-time. The moment the seal appeared, Luo Fan instantly sensed its wonders. He knew that this seal was billions of times more powerful than the previous one. However, it was clear that the pressure this seal placed on the existence was billions of times more powerful than the previous one. At the very least, at that moment, when the seal appeared above the existence's head, he did not show any signs of relief. Instead, he seemed to be in great pain, as if the endless pressure of the world was weighing down on his body, causing his entire body to tremble. His face was pale, and his expression was extremely grave. In fact, droplets of cold sweat continuously seeped out of his body. This also allowed Luo Fan to understand why the existence did not condense the seal to completely get rid of the nothingness in the beginning. However, even though he understood this, Luo Fan did not plan to let the existence do as it pleased. Getting rid of the nothingness was not the full power of the seal. It was only the influence brought by the existence of the seal. In other words, the seal's power was definitely countless times more powerful than the wave that had gotten rid of the nothingness. It was definitely countless times more powerful than the two arms that had grabbed it previously. With this understanding, how could Luo Fan not know how to deal with it? With his own power, he might not even be able to withstand the attack from the two arms earlier. How could he possibly withstand the seal that was countless times more powerful than the two arms? As a result, the moment the wave of the seal enveloped him, his mind was immersed in a mysterious, indescribable realm. He vaguely sensed some kind of supreme power that enveloped the entire primordial world and even seeped out. It was a strange existence that was in a state of boundless chaos. The faintly discernible existence was close to nothing. Some aspects were extremely subtle, as if it did not exist at all. However, it was this faintly discernible feeling that allowed Luo Fan to clearly understand how vast, powerful, and unbelievable the existence was. The primordial world, which was infinitely powerful and contained boundless space-time and power, was not even a speck of dust compared to this existence. In Luo Fan's senses, even if billions of primordial worlds were added together, they would barely be able to act as a speck of dust in front of this existence. Sensing such an unbelievable existence, Luo Fan could not help but feel an indescribable confidence. He had absolute confidence that he could do something even if he faced a saint. With this confidence, he suddenly felt that the seal that the existence before him had cast was incredibly weak and fragile. He could even vaguely sense that the seal had many weaknesses that did not fit its structure. These weaknesses made the seal much weaker than when it was in perfect condition. It also made Luo Fan feel that it would not be difficult for him to break the seal. That existence naturally didn't know how Luo Fan was looking at his seal. At this moment, all of his mind and power were already focused on the seal. The seal was not a physical thing, but a kind of effect, a kind of position. It could be said that the seal was the conclusion of its life's cultivation. It was the result of its cultivation. Every trace, every bit of structure, every world, and every living creature within the seal represented a certain aspect of its cultivation. The seal that was formed when everything was gathered together was its everything. It represented all of its cultivation over trillions of years. It was the combination of all of its abilities and power. The power that the seal could wield was many times greater than its own. It was its most powerful move, worthy of its name. It was also the reason why it believed itself to be the strongest below the saints in the endless state of chaos. If Luo Fan could even block the seal, then the existence would not dare oppose Luo Fan again, even if it was not a saint behind him. As for the seal's coldness that seemed to be able to freeze time, it was the essence of its cultivation. In order to live forever, it could abandon everything, including time, the past, the present, and even the future. It was this abandonment of everything that formed the coldness that could even freeze time. Because the seal was condensed from the existence's Tao of cultivation. When the seal truly became perfect, when it could truly transcend the heavens and the earth and move freely within the chaos, it would be the moment when the existence broke through the Daoyuo's metal Tao and became a saint. Luo Fan was in that wondrous state. He did not care about the space and time that was attacking him. He just raised his hands and slowly swept them across the void. In an instant, a subtle change occurred in a certain location in the untainted world. By then, this change had already triggered an earth-shattering change. The entire untainted starry sky underwent an extremely subtle and profound change. Vaguely, the operation of the huge heavenly cycle star formation had already undergone a profound change. An indescribable power suddenly condensed out of thin air in the void where Luo Fan and that existence were staying. As the power condensed, countless space-time fragments suddenly appeared out of thin air in the void. The way these space-time fragments appeared was indescribably strange. After they appeared, they connected together in a way that was even more complicated than the supreme Great Tao, forming an extremely complicated and mysterious form. This caused the void to turn into a strange black hole. This black hole was different from the two black holes that Luo Fan had casually thrown out. Instead, it was a black hole that contained endless power that could destroy everything. In this black hole, Luo Fan felt his body being repulsed by an endless force that pushed him out of the black hole. As for the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms, he felt that everything about him was being pulled towards the deepest part of the black hole. Chapter 702. The pulling force was not very strong, but it had an irresistible aura. It completely suppressed all of the existence's power, causing the existence to feel like it was sinking into the depths of the dark cave under this not very strong pulling force. TXT ebook, download, ***, that being was shocked. The seal above his head shook violently, and countless inconceivable threads shot out from the seal. These threads were not condensed from energy, and they did not even have a physical form. Instead, they were extremely mysterious, as if they were condensed from the laws of the Grand Tao. Once they appeared, the space around the seal that appeared due to the seal's existence suddenly froze, and the feeling of its existence increased by thousands of times. In an instant, it turned from an illusory space into an incomparably real existence. An indescribable will seeped out of the seal and filled the space-time, causing the scene that was constantly changing to change inexplicably. It seemed to follow some indescribable law, forming an unbelievable power that made the space-time become more and more stable. However, the change in space-time was still unable to stop the invisible pulling force from constantly pulling it. Even though the pulling force had weakened a lot, and the speed at which the being was sinking into the depths of the dark tunnel had slowed down by several times, it was still sinking into the depths of the dark tunnel. At this moment, the 12 eyes of the existence revealed a look of terror. This pulling force was simply too strange and inconceivable. Originally, with his strength, this level of pulling force should not have been able to shake his body in the slightest. Even the smallest and most ordinary speck of dust around him, which had changed because of his existence, should not have been able to do so. However, at this moment, this weak pulling force actually contained some sort of strange law that he could not understand at all. In fact, it was something that he would not be able to understand even if he was a million times stronger. This law did not seem to belong to this world. It was completely different from the laws of the Jilly Great World. It was as if it was above them and could rule over them. And it was precisely because of this mysterious law that the not-so-strong pulling force made him almost unable to resist, causing him to continuously sink towards the depths of the dark tunnel. At this moment, a thought flashed through the existence's mind. It really is the power of a saint. In this way, even if I shrink back now, Master definitely won't blame me. He might even reward me for discovering the schemes of some other great world's existence against this world. After thinking that, he no longer hesitated. He opened his mouth and shouted, It seems that you have already received this attack of mine. I also have something to say to Master, so let's part ways here. If you have time in the future, perhaps you can come to the Jilly Great World for a visit." As he spoke, an indescribably mysterious power suddenly emerged from the depths of his body, a place that Luo Fan could not find any trace of at this time. In an instant, it wrapped around his body and transformed his body into a faintly discernible power that exuded an aura of immortality and indestructibility. After this power appeared, it directly rushed into the purple seal above his head. After the seal obtained this power, all of the imperfections and flaws in Luo Fan's eyes were instantly fixed. The boundless coldness that the seal gave off was added with an aura that could not be destroyed by 10,000 tribulations. When this aura appeared, the pulling force that the existence could not resist at all and could only watch helplessly as it sank into the depths of the dark tunnel seemed to disappear. Although it still existed and was still trying its best, it could no longer have any effect on the seal. It was as if the pulling force was just an illusion, a mere shadow, and would not have any effect on the real space-time at all. The space-time around the seal also underwent a crazy change. All of the light, shadows, and thoughts merged together, forming an inconceivable scene. In that instant, the process of the world being split apart replayed. The clear and turbid split into two, the earth, water, fire, and wind evolved, and endless space-time was born from nothing. It seemed like only an instant, but it also seemed like millions of years had passed. A strange wild world had already appeared around the seal. This world was so strange. The space within it was not very large, but it was extremely complete. The stability of time and space within it far exceeded that of the Great Thousand World, almost reaching the level of the primordial world. There was a strange aura surging within it that filled the void inside, causing the world to seem to be filled with a strange mist. The entire world was filled with an indescribably savage aura. It completely replaced the black hole and occupied the empty space where the destructive force had been a long time ago. It was like a strange space-time that was embedded in the primordial world, firmly fixed in the starry sky. No matter how the laws of the primordial world collided with it, no matter how the great Tao of the primordial world corroded it, it could not shake it at all. Even the power that Luo Fan had triggered, the power that controlled the tribulation of the world and all changes, could not shake it at all. It was not that the power of that existence could not compare to this world, but the power that Luo Fan could trigger could not compare to the power contained in this world. Luo Fan had already been blasted out of the black tunnel by the pulling force when the black tunnel appeared. He arrived in the starry sky of the primordial world and looked at the black tunnel from the outside world. The words that the four-faced, eight-armed existence had said when the pulling force was constantly sinking were a typical example of him wanting to save face and refusing to admit to it. After all, he had already continuously sunk into the darkness and was about to follow in the footsteps of his two arms from before. Yet, he actually dared to shamelessly say that he would part ways here and that they would meet again in the future when they had the time. This kind of boastful words that did not care about the situation naturally caused him to be quite displeased. However, when that person said those words, the moment that undying and indestructible aura emerged from his body, Luo Fan understood that the words of that existence were not just empty words. It was not because he wanted to save face that he would not admit to anything. Instead, it was because he had absolute confidence and strong backing that he dared to say those words. This was because the moment he sensed that power, he understood that it was not something else but the power of a saint. The saint was a power that far surpassed Luo Fan's current cultivation realm. It was a supreme existence that was tens of thousands of times stronger than the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Path. Luo Fan had never seen this kind of power, let alone understood its profoundness. However, just because he had never seen it did not mean that he could not recognize the existence of this power. The saint should be an existence of the same level as the primordial Tao fruit that had obtained the primordial Tao fruit. Perhaps their names were different and their profoundness was different, but they were definitely similar in terms of level. The greatest and most obvious characteristic of this level was that it was undying and indestructible, and could not be worn down by 1,000 tribulations. Even if the world was destroyed and the universe was reborn, it could not make them undying and indestructible. Even if the world's calamity was added to them, it could not make them indestructible at all. Under such circumstances, only sage-level existences could produce an undying and indestructible aura. Therefore, when he sensed the aura emitted by that power, he immediately understood the source of that power. A saint was an omnipotent existence. To such an existence, if Luo Fan also had the primordial Tao fruit of Hun, he would naturally have a way to stop it. However, his current cultivation realm was only at the peak of the zenith heaven scattered Tao. He had barely touched the true path of the zenith heaven and was still billions of miles away from obtaining the primordial Tao fruit of Han. This difference was something that, even if he could summon the power of supreme existence that controlled the world's calamity, he would not be able to stop it. Therefore, after this power appeared, he understood that there was no way he could stop the existence with 4 faces and 8 arms. Though that was the case, Luo Fan did not feel discouraged. He never expected to be able to stop this existence. Although the method this existence used to escape was unexpected, it did not affect him at all. Instead, he felt incredibly fortunate and overjoyed because of this. The existence of the Sage Realm was a supreme realm that was hundreds of millions of times higher than Luo Fan. Being able to witness the power of the Sage Realm in advance was also a rare opportunity for Luo Fan. If he could learn something from it, it would be extremely beneficial for him. Therefore, after knowing that he could not stop that existence, he erased all distracting thoughts and focused on the slightest change before him. Therefore, when the saint-level power wrapped around the existence's body, the existence seemed to be assimilated by the power. Then, the power carried the existence into the purple seal, causing the seal to become extremely perfect. The entire process of the world creation was witnessed by him without missing a single detail. In fact, it was even engraved into the depths of his soul with absolute power. He would never forget it for the rest of his life. This entire process was the creation of the world and the reconstruction of time and space. To the inside, time was naturally meaningless. In other words, the time inside was practically endless to the point of eternity. However, to the outside world, the entire process of endless time only lasted for an instant. In Luo Fan's eyes, when that power appeared, only a billionth of a second had passed. When that strange world that was countless times more advanced than the infinite world and was comparable to the chaos world was formed. It could almost be said that the power appeared at the same time as the world was formed. In such a short period of time, even though Luo Fan had experienced the process of the Sword Madman's creation of the world for God knows how many billions of years, he could not comprehend the process of the creation of the world in this short period of time. He could only vaguely feel that the process of the creation of the world was more perfect than the process of the Sword Madman's creation of the world. It contained more mysteries and principles, but it was not as real as the scene of the Sword Madman's creation of the world. It was as if the entire process was just a rehearsal, just a light and shadow that was reenacted from certain scenes of the past. In other words, the scene of the Sword Madman's creation of the world gave Luo Fan the feeling that it was real. The process of the creation of heaven and earth that was unfolding before his eyes was like a movie. Movies were generally more colorful and dramatic than life, with more ups and downs and more fascinating. However, life was life, and the reality of life could not be compared to movies. This difference in reality was naturally not the only difference between the two. However, the process happened in an extremely short period of time. So although Luo Fan knew that there were more differences, he did not have the time to distinguish them. He could only completely engrave it in the depths of his soul and wait to comprehend it again in the future. No wonder that existence didn't work hard to comprehend the power of a sage, but came to the chaos world to use the great tribulation of heaven and earth to become a sage. So that's why. Luo Fan sighed. At this moment, he had a deeper understanding of the difficulty of becoming a sage. The process of the creation of the world in front of him seemed to have created a world of a much higher level than the major kiliocosm. It seemed to be able to allow the four-faced, eight-armed existence to move freely in the chaotic state, making him immortal and indestructible. However, this world was actually created by the power of the saint-level power. It was equivalent to the existence's master, the sage who had once descended here with his will. The principles and the great Tao contained in it were all comprehended by the sage himself. It was precisely because this process was comprehended by the sage that the entire process was just a replay of the process of the saint-level existence creating the world. That was why it seemed a little unreal, like a movie. This kind of unreality was an extremely important concept. That was, unless the technique of creating heaven and earth was comprehended from nothing. Even if it was perfectly replicated, it would not allow a cultivator to achieve a fundamental breakthrough and become immortal, indestructible, and invulnerable to all tribulations. Even if a saint-level power personally replicated the process of the sage creating the world, it would feel unreal, let alone someone else replicating the process of the sage creating the world. It was precisely because of this concept that the difficulty of becoming a sage's disciple was not substantially lower compared to other living beings. It was not easier for them to become a sage just because they were a sage's disciple and could listen to the sage's teachings. They still had to seek the opportunity to become a sage, and they still had to seize every opportunity to become a sage like ordinary cultivators. At most, they had the protection of a sage, and there would be more opportunities for them to seize. Realizing the difficulty of becoming a sage, an endless fighting spirit surged in Luo Fan's heart. I have so many opportunities. Not only do I have the cultivation method that leads directly to the primordial Hundao fruit, but I also have two connate inextinguishable spiritual lights, two different scenes of the creation of the world, and even the support of the different great Tao of Earth and the universe. There are also several opportunities of the great tribulations of the primordial world. If I still can't obtain the primordial Hundao fruit, then I'm not worthy of being called a human. An extremely firm thought emerged in his mind. Just as endless fighting spirit surged in his heart, the world around the seal that had been created because the seal had become perfect shook slightly. It directly shattered the space-time of the primordial world and disappeared from the primordial world in an instant. The entire process was so strange that it was unimaginable and indescribably mysterious. It was as if the world was originally just an illusion, but it suddenly lost the source of the illusion and disappeared. In an instant, Luo Fan understood that the four-faced, eight-armed existence had used the remaining opportunity of the saint-level power to be directly swept by the space-time and shattered the space-time of the primordial world. He entered the chaotic state before he entered the primordial world and headed towards the Julie world that was countless voids away. Understanding this, Luo Fan could not help but feel that it was a pity. It's a pity that my cultivation level is too low. Otherwise, I would have been able to sense the existence of the chaotic state the moment the primordial world shattered the space-time that day. It's really a pity. Under normal circumstances, when the time and space of the primordial world were shattered, a void would appear. It was just like how the annihilation power had completely shattered the energy, matter, time, and space of the starry sky to create a void. It shattered time and space into nothingness. With Luo Fan's current cultivation level at the peak of the zenith heaven dispelling Tao, he could barely do it. However, this was not the end. Although the void did not belong to the primordial world and isolated the rules and laws of the primordial world, even the influence of the supreme great Tao was weakened to a minimum. However, no matter what, it was still under the influence of the supreme great Tao. In a broad sense, it still belonged to the primordial world. It was just that it was about to leave the primordial world and become independent from the primordial world. Behind this void was the chaotic state of Hun. In other words, if there was an even more terrifying and mysterious power that could shatter the void, it would be able to truly escape the influence of the supreme great Tao of the primordial world. It would truly escape the primordial world and enter the chaotic state. This even more terrifying and mysterious power could not be produced unless it was an existence that had broken through the limit of the Tao realm and obtained the primordial Tao fruit. It was not something that the current Luo fan could do. Just now, the world had used its saint-level power to shatter the time, space, and even the void hidden behind the primordial world in an instant, allowing it to escape from the primordial world. During this process, the chaotic state must have appeared from the shattered void for a moment. If Luo Fan's cultivation level was high enough, he would be able to sense its existence. Unfortunately, the shattering power was too terrifying and mysterious. The void was shattered. Luo Fan did not have enough cultivation to support his gaze, perception, will, and everything else that could reach that position and allow him to sense the change in that instant would also be shattered by the power. Naturally, it was impossible for him to see the chaotic state. Hashtag Chapter 703. After the world disappeared, endless space-time fragments condensed in the void, and endless rules and laws appeared in an unimaginable way. Text first. In the blink of an eye, the hole that had been formed by the earthquake had been destroyed, allowing the starry sky to return to its previous calm state. Looking at its perfect appearance, it was as if all the changes from before had never happened, and the four-faced, eight-armed existence had never appeared in the great wasteland. Luo Fan floated in the starry sky, and an inexplicable expression appeared on his face. After a long time, he let out a long sigh and took a step forward. His figure instantly crossed the infinite void and arrived at the border between the starry sky and the primordial world. Looking down, he saw that the entire primordial world was slightly different from before. It seemed that because of the various changes before, there was an indescribably wonderful invisible thing in the meantime. Faintly, it seemed to be more stable and powerful than before. Just the existence of two arms can actually make the primordial world produce such a feeling of improvement. That person's cultivation realm is probably even higher than I imagined. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but have such a thought flash through his mind. After this thought flashed through his mind, he did not stop. He took another step forward and crossed the infinite void, directly arriving at the original location of Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, it was the most stable and richest place among the 1,296 continents of the primordial world. Arriving here, Luo Fan faintly sensed the breathing and trembling of the entire primordial world. It seemed that all the changes in the primordial world had been transmitted to this place, causing the place to change strangely because of the various changes. He raised his head and looked up at the starry sky. In the starry sky, there were endless stars twinkling. Among them, the two largest stars were like the hubs of the starry sky, guiding every movement of the endless stars. The two huge stars were the sun and moon formed by Panga's eyes. However, at this moment, the starry sky had just taken shape, and almost all the stars were just condensed from the essence of the stars. In other words, they were just shadows. As a result, all the power of the sun and moon needed to be channeled into the great heavenly cycle star formation. With the help of the formation's power, the endless lilies would be condensed, and the condensed essence of the stars would work hard to transform into real stars. Under such circumstances, the sun and moon naturally could not return to their original positions. They could only hang in the starry sky together, but could not move around the primordial world. However, this was only a temporary phenomenon. When the number of stars in the sky condensed in the future, the sun and moon no longer needed to integrate all their power into the heavenly cycle stars. The sun and moon could naturally return to their positions. They could naturally appear and disappear like in the past. The primordial world could naturally return to the righteous path of the sun rising and the moon setting and the sun rising. Luo Fan looked up at the starry sky. The various speculations flowed through his mind without him thinking. It was like common sense. As long as he looked, he would naturally know all the secrets. Perhaps the scene of the sun and moon shining together can only be seen in such a short period of several tens of thousands of years. After several tens of thousands of years, when the primordial world returns to the right path, I'm afraid that this kind of scene will never appear again. Although he sighed with emotion, Luo Fan's mind did not waver because of this. With a thought, the endless magic power distributed in the starry sky trembled slightly, and in an instant, it had already locked onto the sun and moon. The magical power at the peak of the Daoyuo, disbanded Dao, was far from the power of the sages, which was immortal and indestructible, but it was still an extremely mysterious existence. It could be said that if Luo Fan gave up on every single unit of magical power and eliminated all the thoughts and imprints he had placed on the magical power unit, the magical power unit would naturally be able to have a deep free will and complete spiritual consciousness, thus evolving into some kind of extremely mysterious life form. This kind of life might not be able to possess the power of the Daoyuo realm, but it could definitely be comparable to an existence who had attained the primordial unity Dao fruit. Even if the existence who attained the primordial unity Dao fruit had already attained the primordial unity gold, it would still be the same. However, this kind of life had nothing to do with Luo Fan. At most, it was more or less close to him because it was born from Luo Fan. To a certain extent, this was also an ability to create living beings. However, due to congenital reasons, the living beings formed by these magic power units could not cultivate, nor could they improve. How they were when they were just born would be how they were in the future. They would definitely not be able to improve at all. Moreover, they were essentially just one of Luo Fan's magic power units. Therefore, everything they knew, all the abilities they possessed, and all the power they possessed were given to them by Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, even if they possessed the powerful strength that could overwhelm a primordial unity expert, it would not be of any benefit to Luo Fan in terms of cultivation. As for the powerful strength that could overwhelm a primordial unity expert, it was even more useless to Luo Fan in terms of combat. At Luo Fan's level, the human wave tactic had long since become useless. In fact, even at the level of primordial unity or earth immortals, the effect of the human wave tactic was almost negligible. It might be complicated to describe it in other ways, but it was easy to understand if it was described in terms of the Daoyuo realm that Luo Fan was currently at. Luo Fan was a Daoyuo realm being, and each of his magic power units could be transformed into a powerful living being that could overwhelm a primordial unity expert. Therefore, if his opponent could fight against Luo Fan, he would naturally need to be a Daoyuo realm being as well. Similarly, as long as he was a Daoyuo realm being, his power would naturally be able to transform into a powerful living being that could overwhelm a primordial unity expert. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan used the infinite magic power units to transform into living beings to fight against his opponent would only need to use the same method to resist. In fact, they did not even need to use the same method. As long as they gathered their own power around themselves, they would be able to defend against everything. In this way, the human wave tactic was not a threat to a Daoyuo realm being. It was precisely because of these reasons that although Luo Fan knew that each of his magic power units could transform into a powerful living being, he had never used it, much less used it in the battle against the four-faced, eight-armed being. Luo Fan's magic power units were so mysterious that they were now distributed across the starry sky in an infinite number. This naturally allowed Luo Fan's perception and grasp of the starry sky to reach an unbelievable level. Therefore, with just a thought, the sun and the moon were instantly enveloped by a strange domain formed by his magic power. In an instant, everything that happened between the sun and the moon could no longer escape Luo Fan's perception. At this point, Luo Fan would naturally not hold back. With just a thought, the various changes that happened to the sun and the moon after they went through the heavenly tribulation appeared in his mind without reservation. To Luo Fan, the sun and the moon had a special meaning. Back when he was still weak, he had comprehended the supreme godly ability of the Pangu chaotic heavenly pupil through the structure of the two. After that, he even used the sun and the moon's unique characteristics and combined their powers to open up a small world, the bright realm. Therefore, even if the sun and the moon were the hubs of the stars in the universe, he treated them differently from the other stars. After carefully sensing even the slightest change in the sun and the moon, Luo Fan could not help but feel emotional. The mysterious being that controlled the heavenly tribulation really had unimaginable godly abilities. Although the entire universe had gone through such a huge change that even the countless stars had to go through destruction and rebirth, the sun and the moon had instead received the boundless divine might of the great path during the process, improving their essence by 1,000 times. At this moment, the size of the sun and the moon, the energy they contained, and even their structure did not improve much compared to before. In fact, the energy had even weakened slightly. However, after the change of the world, the sun and the moon had vaguely become a part of the supreme Great Tao. Every trace of energy flowing on them, every tremble of the stars, and every movement of the sun and the moon seemed to conform to the supreme Great Tao. It was as if they were all evolving the mysteries of a certain aspect of the supreme Great Tao. Of course, this kind of change was very obscure, unless one was like Luo Fan, who had an incomparably deep understanding of the sun and moon, and had an extreme understanding of its structure. It would be difficult for even the most powerful creature to truly see these mysteries. They would only feel that the sun and moon contained some kind of indescribable truth. The small kiliocosm that had been created by combining the power of the sun and the moon had also undergone an incomparably wonderful change during this process. The size of the small kiliocosm did not change much, but the strength of its space and the stability of its time had increased substantially. Even the flow of time had already stabilized at 365 times that of the primordial world. Looking at the strength of its space and the stability of its time, it was vaguely close to a medium-class world. It had to be known that although the difference between a small kiliocosm and a medium-class world was only one level, one could not forget that a medium-class world could bear the burden of 3,000 small kiliocosms. Under this premise, it could be seen how great the evolution of a small kiliocosm to a medium-class world was. All of these changes had not been done by Luo Fan. Instead, they had been formed naturally by the sun and the moon. Even if some living beings could not see the improvement of the sun and the moon after the change of the world, they could directly see how great the change was from the change of the bright realm. Although the bright realm was already close to a medium-class world, it was still not the end of its evolution. Vaguely, the vital chi in the bright world flowed and intertwined, producing more and more mysterious power. Space and time also leaped in a more profound direction during this process. This change naturally could not escape Luo Fan's perception. When Luo Fan sensed this leap, he understood that the bright realm probably had a higher future. Perhaps one day, it could be raised to a major kiliocosm. This is a rare opportunity. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. What he was admiring was naturally the owners of the bright realm, Luo Fu and Guangpu. He had specially created the bright realm for the two of them. Their wedding had been held in the bright realm. Because of the wedding, the supreme Great Tao had even retracted the Pangu primordial spirit that had been distributed in the bodies of all the innate gods in the primordial world, making the supreme Great Tao more complete. This also forced Luo Fu and the others to work hard to return the opportunity of the Pangu primordial spirit to the innate gods and work hard to pass the Tao to the innate gods. And at this moment, the bright world had such a huge upgrade. For Luo Fu and Guangpu, whose minds were completely merged with the bright world, the benefits were unimaginable. At least, the evolution of the small kiliocosm to the medium kiliocosm coincided with the evolution of the earthly immortal to the primordial unity. If the two of them could fully comprehend the information, it would not take long for them to understand the mystery of Tai and obtain the Tai Dao fruit. Obviously, because their minds had completely merged with the bright realm, The difficulty of understanding the evolution process was far lower than normal. As a result, the evolution of the Ming realm could be said to have directly sent the two of them into the Tai disperser. Perhaps this was not the end, and it might even allow them to have an even greater improvement. How could Luo Fan not admire their rare opportunity? Since there was such an opportunity, Luo Fan naturally would not let it go to waste. With a thought, Luo Fu and Guang Pu's family, who had been kept in the world in the sleeve, appeared in front of him. At this moment, Luo Fu had already escaped from the mysterious realm. The great tribulation of heaven and earth had ended, and 99% of the living beings in the primordial world had been killed. How could the blessing of the main character of the world be strong? Naturally, he could not continue to be immersed in that mysterious realm. However, at this moment, Luo Fu did not need to be immersed in that realm anymore, because he had achieved his goal. Who knew how many tens of thousands of years of understanding in that realm had allowed him to break through the bottleneck and directly break through the original realm? However, because he had always been in the world in the sleeve of Luo Fan, he could not activate the rules, laws, and even the supreme great Tao of the outside world. Therefore, he could not really achieve the Tai Dao fruit. Around him, Guang Pu, Luo Chunyang, and Luo Gua naturally did not need to be mentioned. They had been constantly cultivating in the world in the sleeve over these years. But after all, the world in the sleeve was different from the outside world. Although their cultivation realm had increased slightly, it was not worth mentioning and was far from Luo Fu's. Greetings, father, master, grandfather. As soon as they appeared in the outside world, they did not have the time to observe the changes in the outside world before they discovered the existence of Luo Fan. They did not dare to be negligent and hurriedly turned over and knelt down to greet Luo Fan. After doing this, they finally reacted. Their expressions were filled with inexplicable surprise. They raised their heads to look at Luo Fan, their eyes filled with deep admiration and joy. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but laugh. He raised his hand and waved, and they naturally stood up as if they were willing. There is no need to be so polite to a family. He smiled faintly. His words flowed into their ears like a spring breeze, making them feel like they were instantly immersed in a thick, warm aura, as if they had entered an extremely safe and comfortable place in an instant. All the pressure, uneasiness, and anxiety in their hearts had completely disappeared in an instant. This was because when Luo Fan spoke, it naturally formed a magical effect similar to the rules of the Great Tao. It directly comforted their souls, causing them to feel all kinds of inexplicable feelings. These feelings were so unexplainable, as if they were being carried by the outside world, almost like an illusion. However, Luo Fu and the others did not feel like they were affected by the environment at all. Even their spirits did not sense any traces of external power, much less any traces of these feelings being carried by the outside world. They knew very well that these feelings came from their hearts. It was because they had hidden the same feelings in their hearts that they were triggered at this time. At this moment, the few of them felt incomparably safe and relaxed. At the same time, they developed a kind of boundless admiration for Luo Fan's power, because they already understood that just a single sentence from Luo Fan was able to cause them to have such a miraculous feeling, and it displayed how great the gap between them and Luo Fan was. It had already arrived at an extent that couldn't even be described with words. If this was in the past, when their strength was still extremely low, it would naturally not be strange. But at this moment, their cultivation realm had reached an unbelievable level. Luo Fu had even broken through the bottleneck of the earth immortal fruit of Wei and achieved the realm of primordial unity. His strength was more than 1 billion times stronger than before. But under such circumstances, the gap between them and Luo Fan was still so huge. How could they not admire him? Luo Fan did not waste any time. After saying that, he said, "The tribulation has passed, and the primordial world has changed greatly. You will definitely gain something by comprehending it. Don't waste time, go quickly." As soon as he said that, countless lights and shadows appeared in the minds of Luo Fu and the others. These lights and shadows coincided with what he said, as if they directly evolved the development process of the tribulation, the great changes that happened in the primordial world, and the various scenes of how they obtained the harvest. This was not caused by Luo Fan's will, but his cultivation realm had become so powerful that it could distort the supreme primordial world, Great Tao, almost surpassing the realm of the law of words and the law of words. This caused the primordial world to naturally produce a wonderful change because of his words, and directly projected such lights and shadows in the minds of Luo, Fu, and the others. Because of the existence of these lights and shadows, the moment Luo Fan said those words, Luo, Fu, and the others naturally understood many facts that they did not understand before. Their faces involuntarily showed an extremely shocked expression.